Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case. The case of Rachel Barber. The story from 1999 in Australia. Rachel Barber was born on September 12, 1983, in a small town in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. She is the eldest of 3 daughters. Rachel's parents, Mike Barber and Elizabeth, lived in a middle-class neighborhood, and the girl grew up in a very loving and close-knit family. From a young age, Rachel had a deep love for classical music and a passion for dance. Her parents decided to enroll her in a ballet class. After a few lessons, they were convinced of her talent. To support her creativity, they set up a makeshift studio at home where Rachel could continue her lessons. As time went on, Rachel transformed into a beautiful young woman. She had a slender body and was popular among her friends, but despite this, she was quite shy and reserved. Her commitment to dance made it difficult for her to keep up with her schoolwork, and she worried that her academic struggles would hinder her progress in dance. This concern led her to ask her parents to allow her to transfer from her regular high school to a dance academy called Dance Factory, where she could fully focus on her passion for dance. Her parents supported her desire to pursue her passion. After enrolling in the dance academy, Rachel quickly made close friends and met Manny Corella, a fellow dancer with whom she felt an instant connection. Their romantic relationship blossomed, and their peers affectionately referred to them as Romeo and Juliet. Rachel's life was busy and filled with a schedule, but this was not a problem for her since she was doing what she loved. Every morning, one of her parents took her to the local tram stop. From there, Rachel traveled to meet her boyfriend and friends, and together they headed to the academy. After classes, they would regroup and take the tram back, where Rachel's father would pick her up for the ride home. Rachel's life seemed idyllic. She was young, attractive, popular, supported by a loving family and a caring boyfriend. On the evening of Sunday, February 28, 1999, while the Barber family was having dinner together, Rachel received 2 phone calls, but did not disclose who she was speaking to, downplaying their significance. This moment marked a turning point for her. On March 1, 1999, the day started off like any other for the Barber family. Rachel woke up early, got ready, and left for the academy. Her father, Mike, drove her to the tram stop, promising to pick her up that evening at 6:15 p.m. After hugging her father goodbye, Rachel met her boyfriend and her friends at the next stop, and they all headed to the academy together. Excitedly, Rachel told her friends that she would earn a significant amount of money that evening. Although they pressed her for details, she insisted it was a secret and that she couldn't share more. Given Rachel's appearance, her friends speculated that she was involved in modeling work. During their lunch break, Rachel and her boyfriend Manny visited a nearby shopping center, where she paused in front of a shoe store to admire a pair of shoes she had wanted for months but couldn't afford. She entered the store and asked the salesperson to hold a pair of shoes for her so she could return the next day to buy them. Manny pressed her again to share details about a mysterious job and whom she would be working with, but Rachel only mentioned that she would be meeting an old acquaintance that evening who had found her a well-paying job. Manny found it odd that she had so many secrets, but despite his persistent questioning, Rachel remained tight-lipped. She reassured her boyfriend not to worry, claiming it was nothing significant and posed no danger. When class ended, the group gathered as usual to head to the tram stop and go home, but Rachel said she would take a different route this time to meet someone. She hugged Manny, promised to call him that night when she got home, and then left. Concern arose when Mike arrived at the tram stop at 6:15 p.m. and noticed that his daughter was missing. This was unusual for him, as Rachel was typically very responsible. Trying to remain calm, he assumed she might be late for the tram and chose to wait for her. However, as time went by without any sign of Rachel, his worry grew. Elizabeth, Rachel's mother, also began to feel anxious when neither her husband nor her daughter returned home for dinner. At 7:40 p.m., Michael called Elizabeth to inform her that Rachel was missing. They were extremely worried because Rachel had a fear of the dark, stemming from previous incidents where two men had followed her home. The parents decided to contact the police for help. The police dismissed the concerns of Rachel's parents, telling them that not enough time had passed to file a missing person report, suggested that their daughter might just be protesting and had run away temporarily. The police advised them not to worry and to go home and wait. However, her parents knew their daughter well and were certain that she would never behave in such a way. Their family communication was open and casual, and Rachel felt comfortable discussing anything with her parents. Rachel's parents sensed something was wrong and decided to search for Rachel themselves. They first reached out to her boyfriend and her friends from the academy. Manny informed Rachel's parents about a mysterious job-related meeting she had that night, which they were completely unaware of. They also learned that Rachel had not taken the tram with her friend. Alarmed by this new information, the parents went to the police station but were ignored again. The next day, Rachel still had not been heard from, so her parents and friends began to search the entire city. They spoke to people, distributed flyers with her photo, and pursued every possible lead, no matter how small. Unfortunately, their efforts seemed fruitless, but they did not give up. Rachel's loved ones organized search groups, and many volunteers joined in. News of the missing young dancer spread quickly, and it wasn't until the third day, as the case gained public attention, that the police finally decided to assist. The first suspicion that arose with the police was regarding Rachel's boyfriend, but he had a very convincing alibi, so he was excluded from the list of suspects. Finally, a crucial lead emerged. A former student from Rachel's academy reported seeing her with another young woman at the tram stop on the night she went missing. The witness shared that she traveled on the tram with them and overheard their conversation, which sounded perfectly normal for two young girls. She also noted the specific station where they got off, mentioning that Rachel stood out because she looked well put together, while the other girl appeared more casual. The police were able to confirm this information by checking surveillance footage from the tram stop. The investigators' next step was to examine the Barber family's phone records, particularly from the days leading up to Rachel's disappearance. They discovered something. On the night before she went missing, Rachel received 2 calls from a former neighbor who was also the family's nanny, Caroline Reed Robertson. They had lost touch with her 5 years ago. This revelation brought a sense of calm to the Barber family. They began to believe the police's theory that Rachel had run away with Caroline for reasons unknown to them. At least this makes them believe that Rachel is still safe. The investigators revealed that Caroline worked as a mobile phone operator in Melbourne. When the police investigated her workplace and found that the day after Rachel's disappearance, Caroline went to work, but everyone could see that she was very upset and pale, so they sent her home. On the following day, she called in sick but still came to work to collect money owed to her by a colleague. Caroline explained that she needed the money to pay for a truck. Investigators also learned that she had applied for a bank loan during that time, but was denied. Following these findings, the detectives decided it was important to speak with Caroline's father, David Reed. David shared that when he learned about his daughter's epilepsy, he went to visit her. Initially, Caroline refused to let him inside the apartment. When Caroline finally allowed him in, the bedroom door remained closed the entire time. On March 12, 1999, the police obtained a search warrant for the apartment. When they entered, they found Caroline unconscious on the floor of her room, apparently having suffered an epileptic seizure. They called an ambulance and rushed her to the hospital. Besides, they discovered clothing that was not Caroline's size, and they were struck by the numerous photographs of Rachel plastered on the walls. They also found writings, notes, and several intimate diaries. While the contents of these diaries seemed harmless at first, they later uncovered something disturbing within the entries. That evening, when Caroline woke up, The investigator immediately asked her about Rachel's whereabouts. Her response was unexpected and shocking. She coldly stated that Rachel was dead. The investigator couldn't accept what he had just heard and asked her again if she was sure. He wondered if there was still a chance to save Rachel. Caroline confirmed it was too late, stating that she had killed Rachel and buried her on the family farm next to her pets. Following Caroline's directions, the police went to the site and discovered Rachel's body in a decomposed state, with a computer cable around her neck. This revelation left everyone in disbelief, especially the Barber family, who were devastated to learn they had lost their young daughter, particularly at the hands of her former nanny. Caroline lived near the Barber house and came from a wealthy but troubled family. Throughout her life, Caroline battled depression stemming from feelings of inferiority and her parents' indifference. She has epilepsy, obesity, and acne, which worsened her already low self-esteem. At school, she faced bullying, which made her increasingly withdrawn and fueled her self-hatred. In her teenage years, she began writing in a diary, chronicling her internal struggles and disappointments. She expressed thoughts like, "I don't belong anywhere in this crazy world because I am ugly, fat, and have a horrible face. I am a rarity." At 14, she drew a self-portrait highlighting her negative self-image, surrounded by words like loser, unwanted, dirty, fat, useless. In other words, she grew up despising herself, and her situation worsened significantly with her parents' divorce. Afterward, Caroline desperately sought her father's approval and support, writing him heartfelt letters about her struggles. Unfortunately, he did not respond with understanding or sympathy, nor did he visit her. Meanwhile, her mother, Gail, concerned about Caroline's issues and noticed her unusual behavior. Gail grew closer to Rachel's mother and confided in her. When she learned about Caroline's challenges, Elizabeth suggested that Caroline see a specialist for help. However, Caroline's mother felt powerless to assist her daughter. It was in this context that Caroline joined the Barber family. From the start, she realized that their family was very different from hers. There was a sense of love and happiness. Meeting Rachel, then 10 years old, she felt that this girl had everything Caroline wanted but couldn't have. In Caroline's eyes, Rachel was perfect. This admiration sparked a dark obsession and jealousy within Caroline toward Rachel. Caroline aimed to gain the Barber's trust, which she accomplished by being hired multiple times to care for Rachel and her younger sisters. During this period, she began writing in her diary about Rachel, portraying her as a model for self-improvement. Caroline's troubled mindset led her to see Rachel as entirely positive, fueling her desire to emulate her and attain what Rachel had. However, her efforts to achieve this were unsuccessful for a while, especially after Caroline's family moved away. Despite this, she continued to pursue her obsession with Rachel, documenting everything in her diary. It was possibly at this point that she started to develop a dark plan. Her fantasy evolved into a calculated scheme. Wishing to be like Rachel was no longer sufficient. She felt she needed to become Rachel. To achieve this, one of the two girls had to disappear. In early 1999, Caroline reached out to Rachel with an offer for a reputable modeling job. However, Elizabeth intervened, stating that her daughter was too young to work as a model. Undeterred, Caroline tried again, hoping for a better outcome. On the eve of her plans, she called Rachel to persuade her to meet. Caroline meticulously detailed her intentions in her diary, outlining every step to ensure success. For example, she wrote about poisoning a pizza with sleeping pills and instructed Rachel to claim she couldn't discuss their meeting due to confidentiality regarding a psychological study. Other disturbing entries described plans to drug Rachel with illegal substances, hide her body, alter her appearance, and dispose of her. One entry included reminders to check the farm on Tuesday, arrange a bank loan for a move, disguise her hair, clean the house thoroughly, and wash the carpet. These notes led investigators to conclude that Caroline acted with premeditation, having planned everything in advance. Just as planned, Caroline misled Rachel by promising her good payment to take part in a psychological evaluation, but insisted that Rachel keep it a secret. Trusting Caroline, Rachel did as she said. In her testimony, Caroline mentioned that she couldn't recall all the details of the incident but remembered meeting Rachel at the train station and then taking a tram to her apartment. Once inside, Caroline drugged Rachel with sleeping pills. The next thing she remembered was strangling Rachel with a computer cable. Afterward, she concealed Rachel's body in her closet for 2 days while she dealt with moving arrangements. A man who helped her move verified this. He remembered transporting furniture and an object wrapped in bags, and Caroline had advised him to be careful with it because she claimed it was a statue. According to her records, it was revealed that Caroline planned to escape to a new location and start fresh with a different identity. Caroline also detailed the new persona she wanted to create, which included having the same birth date as Rachel. At one point, she asked Rachel's sister for Rachel's birth date to help her obtain a birth certificate and falsify the birth date on it. Caroline portrayed her new identity as a young, rebellious girl with facial features similar to Rachel's. She attempted to secure a bank loan to start a new life but was denied. Caroline Robertson was charged with Rachel Barber's death on March 13, 1999, and remained in custody until her trial in November 2000. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving a minimum of 14 years. The judge described Caroline's actions as malicious, stating that she took Rachel's life to pursue an excessive dream, motivated by jealousy of Rachel's beauty and individuality, believing that this would lead to her own success and happiness. However, the judge also noted that Caroline had a personality disorder that influenced her behavior and indicated that she posed a real danger to anyone who became the focus of her intense attention. 3 years after the incident, Elizabeth published a book called The Perfect Victim, which recounts her daughter's story. In 2009, a film about the case was released. While in prison, Caroline began a romantic relationship with another inmate. She became eligible for parole in 2013, but the Barbers, Rachel's parents, protested her early release, leading to a postponement of the decision in subsequent years. Ultimately, Caroline was granted parole in 2015. The Barbers are uncertain about her rehabilitation, but hope that authorities will monitor her behavior once she is free. Caroline's appearance had changed significantly since her incarceration, and her lawyer noted that she had transformed her behavior during her time in prison. He mentioned that she felt happier than ever while incarcerated. An innocent young girl lost her life due to circumstances over which she had no control. A troubled, unstable person mistakenly believed that taking the lives of others would grant her the qualities she envied, and that beauty was the path to happiness. Caroline clearly needed psychological help, which was evident through her behavior within her family. Unfortunately, the help she needed did not arrive in time, resulting in a tragic outcome. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Jody Myers. One day, 20-year-old Jody Myers and her fiancé, 31-year-old Neil Archer, were attending a birthday party for Jody's stepfather. Although the celebration was lively, Neil was not enjoying themselves. Neil was reluctant to participate and chose to sit in Jody's car while she mingled with family and friends by the fireplace. Jody frequently had to return to the car to convince Neil to join the party. Some guests even brought him snacks in hopes of cheering him up. Around 8:30 p.m., Neil and Jody left the party, and their argument occurred at home. Jody's mother, Lucy, received a message from her daughter stating that she couldn't come home that night because she had broken up with Neil, and she changed her phone number. Jody mentioned she would let her parents know where she was later, that she had moved to a different area, and that she had quit her job. Once things calmed down, She promised to explain everything in detail. Jody also assured her mother that she was safe, that her friends were with her, and she also expressed her love for her family. The message was poorly written and lacked punctuation, which concerned Lucy. She noticed several spelling errors, which were also unusual for Jody, who generally had no issues with spelling and grammar. Normally, if she made a mistake, she would quickly correct it, but in this case, she did not. One possible explanation for Jody's behavior is that she was feeling rushed or stressed after breaking up with her fiancé the night before. However, it was puzzling why Jody would take the time to write a message when she was likely overwhelmed. This causes Jody's mother and sisters to suspect that she was not the one who sent the message. Furthermore, Jody would never abandon her 2-year-old son, Elijah, who she had with Neil. Her family was certain of this. Elijah was the center of Jody's life, and she loved him dearly. Friends and family believed that if Jody had intended to leave, she would have taken him with her. This concern prompted the family to report Jody's disappearance to the police. The family members were reluctant to accept that something terrible might have happened, but they were also worried about losing precious time. Doubts began to arise in their minds, and they feared that the police might not take their report seriously, as cases of missing young women who had argued with their fiancés were often overlooked. However, the police treated Jody's family's report with great seriousness. They were particularly concerned that Jody had left her child behind, which was an unusual situation they couldn't ignore. Detectives quickly launched a search, and public worry grew when it became known that someone had used Jody's bank card to withdraw $250 from an ATM in the city center. This raised the possibility that either Jody was nearby and intended to return, or an unknown person was trying to cover up the situation. Jody Myers was officially reported missing, prompting an investigation. Jody's story quickly gained attention across, especially among investigative teams. Authorities interviewed everyone close to Jody, including her fiancé Neil, but none could provide useful information about her whereabouts. Neil, being the last person to see her, shared details with the police. He revealed that he and Jody had argued on their way home from a party. During the drive, Jody angrily threw her ring out of the window, and the police later searched for it. Neil also stated that he last saw Jody when she got into a red Nissan X-Trail with an unknown man and woman. The police did not disclose that Neil was their main focus. They described him as a valuable witness, but at that point, he was their only person of interest. Extensive searches were conducted in the areas surrounding where Jody was last seen, including local bushland and the Murray River, but no trace of her was found. The ring Jody allegedly threw out of the car also remained missing, despite Neil indicating where it might be. As the investigation progressed, relatives, friends, and acquaintances frequently appeared in the media to discuss the case and share their thoughts. Neil's mother, 57-year-old Margaret Archer, spoke to reporters about her son's partner, Jody. Margaret expressed hope for Jody's return, as she is needed by her son. Meanwhile, Neil addressed the media, responding to their presence outside his house while playing with his son. He took the increased attention calmly, stating only that it was a bit stressful for him, but he was happy to assist the authorities in the investigation. For the purpose of the investigation, the police requested video footage from ATM surveillance cameras and were surprised by what they found. The money had not been withdrawn by Jody or Neil, as they had previously thought. Instead, it was a woman in a hooded sweatshirt, clearly trying to conceal her identity. Detectives quickly identified this woman as Margaret. While her cash withdrawal did not implicate her in murder, she was arrested for theft. It was unclear how Margaret had obtained Jody's bank card and used it after Jody went missing. Margaret might have stolen the card or borrowed it from Jody. Regardless, Margaret strongly denied any involvement in Jody's disappearance, both to the police and in public. After being questioned, she was released on bail, but this unusual situation led investigators to closely examine her actions during the time Jody was missing. Detectives discovered 2 receipts from different hardware stores. Margaret had purchased 10 bags of cement from one store and another 10 bags from a second store, along with a wheelbarrow. These purchases were notable for their large quantity. Investigators needed to verify that these transactions were made by Margaret. They visited the store where Neil's mother had gone 3 days after Jody's disappearance. After reviewing the surveillance footage, they confirmed that Margaret had indeed bought a large amount of cement. However, they questioned why she needed so much. While buying construction materials is not illegal, detectives still needed to understand the context of those purchases. The purchase had been made with the exact amount that Margaret withdrew from the ATM, which left the police confused, until they spoke with Margaret's husband, Lawrence. He explained that on the day Jody went missing, he was in Tasmania. When he returned home, his son Neil told him he had a Father's Day gift. Since Neil rarely showed generosity, he was intrigued. Neil led him to the yard, where a freshly poured concrete slab lay in the shed, which Neil had just finished. Lawrence was surprised, as he thought of Neil as lazy and selfish, but he could see that his son had done a lot of hard work. He thanked Neil for the gift and began sharing stories about his trip to Tasmania. As the detectives listened, they began to connect the dots, realizing that Neil was no longer just a witness. He was now the main suspect in Jody's disappearance. At the same time, Neil's brother, Aaron Archer, felt guilty because he knew something, but was afraid to speak up for fear of implicating his family. Aaron was hesitant to carry out certain tasks requested by relatives. When he learned something troubling, he urged Neil to go to the police, but Neil refused. With no other option, he went to the station and decided to share everything he knew. On September 24, 2015, at midnight, Aaron met with police officers at a predetermined location. Following his brother's visit to the police station, Neil was taken into custody and charged with the murder of his fiancée, Jody Myers. The next day, investigators searched the home of Margaret in Murray Bridge, a town about an hour and a half from Adelaide. During this search, forensic teams discovered a woman's body buried in a shallow grave beneath a concrete slab in the shed. This slab had been a Father's Day gift for Lawrence. Experts later confirmed that the body was Jody Myers, who had been missing for a month. Investigators indicated that the evidence suggested a violent murder had taken place. Afterward, Lucy's son-in-law, Michael Bates, publicly expressed the family's hopes for Jody's safe return until they received the tragic news. Her death created a profound loss for them, but they cherished the loving memories of her as a mother, daughter, and sister, emphasizing that she was not to be blamed for anything. From that point on, the family was left with only memories, which they considered their most precious treasures. A few months later, Margaret was arrested for her alleged involvement in Jody's murder. Despite the charges, Margaret was working hard to prove her innocence. It is believed that Neil's father, Lawrence, was unaware of the events surrounding the case. Then, investigators have built a detailed narrative into the Jody Myers case. After returning home from a party, Jody and Neil had a severe argument. Neil felt that he had not impressed Jody's parents and believed they wanted him and Jody to break up. In a moment of rage, he lost control and strangled Jody with the cord of his hoodie until she stopped breathing. Later, reports surfaced that while in jail, Neil told other inmates that his mother had been present during the argument and had restrained Jody, although this claim could not be substantiated. The following day, Neil asked his mother to help him hide the crime, and Margaret, without hesitation, agreed to dispose of the evidence related to the murder of Jody, who had given her a grandchild. She withdrew cash from the ATM to buy cement and added $10 to Jody's phone to send a message to Jody's family. It became clear that Neil pressured his mother to handle all the illicit activities for him. Margaret had previously been a victim of domestic violence herself, which makes it even more perplexing that she would agree to cover up such a tragic crime. Many people find this behavior abnormal, Regardless of a mother's love for her child, it is difficult to believe she would justify helping him in such a horrific situation. However, some parents claim they would do anything for their children, and Margaret likely belonged to this group, which is truly disturbing. Even more alarming is the fact that Jody's 2-year-old son, Elijah, partially witnessed the incident. He was sitting in the car while Margaret visited hardware stores and made purchases. It was also revealed that Elijah was in Margaret's house when Neil transported and buried his mother's body in a shed. As the case progressed, new information shocked the public. The police recorded phone calls between Margaret and Neil discussing how to hide the crime. Both felt guilty and unable to find a solution to their problem. During their conversations, they also mentioned Neil's brother, Aaron. Margaret attempted to involve her second son, and later his half-sister, in the cover-up. She pressured them to burn clothes and destroy evidence, such as cement bags. However, Aaron cleverly refused to comply and eventually reported the situation to the police. In 2016, Neil Archer pleaded guilty to the murder of Jody Myers. In 2017, he was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 22 years. This outcome is relatively favorable by Australian standards, and it is reassuring that the murderer accepted his guilt. In South Australia, a guilty plea can lead to a sentence reduction of about 30%, but the judge determined that Neil did not merit this reduction. Jody's friends and family were pleased with the verdict. Meanwhile, Margaret Archer hesitated until the last moment to admit her wrongdoing. She changed her story and confessed. Her lawyer claimed that Margaret had always lived a good life and cared deeply for her large family. However, considering that she waited until the very end, unwilling to confess to the crime, one can easily conclude that Margaret felt no remorse for her actions. In 2018, she was sentenced to 6.5 years in prison for aiding a criminal. Then, she was released in June 2022. Meanwhile, little Elijah is being cared for by his grandmother, Lucy. Angel Ormston was born in 1975 in Mentor-on-the-Lake, a quiet suburb of Ohio, USA. This area has about 7,000 residents, and everyone knows each other. Children from local families often get along and grow up together. Life here is very simple and similar. The local high school serves as the main place of learning for most young people in town. Angel is a friendly and cheerful girl. She particularly enjoys walking around the area with her friends and often drives around with loud music. Local teenagers often gathered at a large shopping mall in a nearby, bigger city, which featured restaurants, a movie theater, and various stores. It made sense that Angel would find a part-time job there. In the summer of 1992, she started working at a fast food restaurant as she prepared for her senior year of high school. This job not only allowed her to earn some pocket money but also helped her save up for college. Her daily routine was consistent. She worked in the mornings and spent time with friends afterward. On the evening of July 31, 1992, 17-year-old Angel planned to go to her restaurant to pick up her paycheck and do some shopping. She promised her mother, Jackie, she would be home before the mall closed. Initially, her mother was not concerned and went to bed, assuming she was out with friends. The next morning, she woke up to find Angel missing from her room. Despite this, she didn't worry too much because it was common for her daughter to stay over at friends' houses, especially on weekends and holidays, so she pushed her uneasy thoughts aside. In this close-knit community, crime was rare, and young people often visited each other without worry. However, Angel, a high school student, didn't always keep her mother informed, which led to concerns. Her mother didn't want to restrict Angel too much, allowing her daughter considerable freedom that matched her independent spirit. Angel's upbringing was relaxed. Her mother was adaptable and aimed to maintain a harmonious environment. Meanwhile, her father was often away as a long-distance truck driver. Despite the lack of strict rules or curfews in the Angel household, unsettling thoughts began to creep into Jackie's mind. Angel was missing all Saturday, and when her mother woke up on Sunday to find she still hadn't returned home, worries began to set in. She called families where Angel could stay, and her brother also went to the shopping center where she worked. Upon arriving at the parking lot, Angel's brother noticed her Honda Civic, which heightened his concern. He hoped to find Angel inside but instead found her purse, comb, and other personal items left on the driver's seat, indicating she might have vanished. He checked the burger joint where she worked but learned she hadn't shown up for a couple of days. Alarmed, he contacted Jackie, their mother, who hurried to the shopping center to retrieve Angel's car and uncover the truth while pushing aside her fears. Initially, she hoped it was just a series of coincidences. Angel often went out at night with her best friend, Stacy. That day, Stacy's family could not be reached, which gave Jackie some peace of mind. Nonetheless, anxiety grew as Jackie drove around the mall looking for Angel, but she found no trace of her daughter. Friends who did manage to contact her hadn't seen Angel since Friday. By 8 p.m., Jackie still couldn't reach Angel, deepening her worry. Jackie finally decided to report her daughter Angel as missing by going to the police. Although Angel was last seen on July 31st, Jackie did not visit the station until August 2nd. This delay raised suspicions among the police, but Jackie explained that she believed she needed to wait 48 hours before reporting someone missing. Jackie provided detailed information about Angel, including her life and relationships. Jackie asserted that, up until the very last moment, she was not worried that anything serious had happened to Angel. On the morning of Monday, August 2nd, Jackie managed to reach Stacy, who confirmed Jackie's fears. Stacy had spent the entire weekend at her sister's house and hadn't seen Angel. She was shocked to learn that her friend had been missing for over 2 days. Stacy tried to contact some mutual friends, but none had seen Angel. Following this, Jackie provided the police with new information, prompting them to initiate an active search for Angel. The police first examined Angel's car, which showed no signs of a struggle. The car was in normal condition, with no blood, signs of theft, or forced entry. The officers believed Angel may have left the car willingly. Given her age, they suggested she could have run away, but Jackie rejected this idea, citing their good relationship. Angel was not involved with banned substances and had always remained calm during her teenage years. Despite her independent nature, she was not the type to run away. In fact, she had been making future plans, including furthering her education at university. Detectives worked extensively to investigate Angel's disappearance. They suspected she might have been kidnapped from the car and collected many fingerprints at the scene. Although there were numerous prints, all belonged to family and close friends. Despite this, every individual had to be investigated to clear them as suspects since there were no other leads. The investigation began with Angel's father, a truck driver, but he was quickly ruled out because he had a verified alibi. He was in another state when his daughter went missing. Next, detectives looked into Angel's mother, Jackie. Her refusal to take a polygraph test raised significant suspicion and drew the attention of the investigators. They noted her delay in contacting the police and her decision to take Angel's car from the parking lot soon after learning about the disappearance, which further fueled suspicions. The police lacked the authority to compel her to take a polygraph test, and there was no direct evidence against her. As a result, the investigation continued with Jackie being the primary suspect. Jackie claimed that on the evening when Angel left home, she intended to go to a burger place. However, interviews with local staff revealed that Angel never arrived to pick up her paycheck that day. Investigators seized the opportunity to gather more information from Angel's colleagues. They quickly eliminated Jackie from the list of suspects due to Angel's good relationship with her family. However, they developed several other theories, including a suspicious connection to a former manager known for inappropriate behavior toward female employees. Investigators suspected that the former manager had been spying on female staff while they changed into their work uniforms. Later, he was fired for a harassment incident. Several female employees reported that this manager had touched them inappropriately. When the police investigated him, they discovered he had a criminal record for inappropriate behavior with minors, making him the main suspect. Other women also mentioned that he frequently focused on Angel, often looking for chances to be alone with her in the kitchen and making inappropriate comments. When this was discovered, the detectives were so focused on the case that they overlooked Jackie. The former manager was quickly located and interviewed, but he denied any involvement in Angel's disappearance. He said that she hasn't seen him since they worked together. He claimed that, on the day she went missing, he was far from his hometown and provided a timesheet showing that he was at another location of the fast food chain that day. Despite this evidence, detectives did not exclude him as a suspect and continued to question everyone at the restaurant, including both staff and management. Through their investigation, they uncovered a secret that Angel had kept from her family. She had been fired for consistently being late. While she was indeed heading to the restaurant to collect her final paycheck, this revelation did not provide any new leads regarding her disappearance. Gradually, all of Angel's co-workers were ruled out as suspects because they had alibis. Neither Angel's former manager nor her mother was considered a viable suspect in the case, making it difficult for the police to conduct their investigation. Communication with Angel's closest friends did not reveal any new information. Everyone was shocked at the idea that someone in her circle might wish her harm. She was gentle, trusting, and usually avoided conflict. However, her trusting nature made her vulnerable to someone who might manipulate her into a dangerous situation. After a long period without contact, fears grew that Angel had died. She hadn't reached out to anyone, appeared in public, or used any payment methods. Given these circumstances, the police decided to re-examine the people closest to her, as those responsible for such crimes are often found among acquaintances. The focus shifted to her best friend, Stacy. Although they had spoken to her briefly before, this time the interview lasted over 4 hours. From the start, Stacy expressed a strong willingness to help but firmly denied any involvement. She was cleared as a suspect when she provided a confirmed alibi. She had spent the entire weekend at her sister's house and they had been together the whole time, cooking side by side. The police are trying to ask Stacy if she knows about Angel's relationship with a man. Stacy revealed that Angel had recently become interested in a young man named Mark Sotka, a 19-year-old who had just graduated with honors from their high school. Stacy explained that Angel had been in love with Mark for a long time and even hoped to start a serious relationship with him. However, Angel was very private, especially about her relationships, and only Stacy knew about Mark, not even sharing it with her mother. During the questioning, Stacy reveals that Angel was aware of her pregnancy shortly before she disappeared. They had talked several times about the possibility of telling Mark about the baby, and Angel was optimistic that he would accept her and the child, viewing it as the start of their life together. Stacy was doubtful, but Angel was convinced she could build a family with Mark. The detectives decided to investigate Mark's background before confronting him. It appeared that Mark was not ready for fatherhood. Just before Angel went missing, he started college, which suggests he may have only considered Angel a short fling while planning to focus on his studies. They found no incriminating evidence against him, as he had a clean record and a solid reputation in school. Eventually, Mark was called to the police station for questioning. He was surprised to learn that he was considered a suspect in Angel's disappearance. He denied any involvement and refuted Stacy's claims about their relationship. When he learned that Angel might be pregnant, he laughed it off, dismissing it as a fabrication by his girlfriend. He admitted to having had a brief encounter with Angel at the beginning of summer but said they had not met again since then. Additionally, he had been in a relationship with another girl for 2 years. To support his claims, he needed to provide proof and a reliable alibi. Mark testified that he left work at 5 p.m. on July 31, 1992 to go to a shopping mall. He intended to buy a gift for his girlfriend and then meet friends at a pizzeria. The police began to investigate his account closely. His employment at a car dealership was verified through his timesheet, which matched his claimed working hours. Additionally, they found a receipt for the gift purchase. Several friends from work supported his story, confirming he was at the pizzeria until around 9 p.m. The only inconsistency was that some staff members at the places he visited that evening did not remember him. However, Mark willingly took a polygraph test, which showed no evidence of his involvement in any crime. As a result, he was cleared as a suspect. The investigation hit another dead end, prompting detectives to revisit earlier theories of escape or kidnapping. Discovering that Angel might have been pregnant reinforced these theories. Her family may have opposed her having a child at just 17, leading her to potentially run away to start a new life with the baby. Unfortunately, these possibilities did not bring them any closer to finding her. Frustrated by the lack of progress, Angel's mother decided to take action. She reached out to the community through local media in hopes of gathering information. Her appeal successfully raised awareness about Angel's disappearance, turning the incident into a well-known topic of discussion. Friends and concerned individuals joined in, distributing thousands of leaflets. Charities became involved, and a fund was established, raising $10,000 as a reward for anyone who could provide useful information for the investigation. In the following weeks, the police department received numerous requests for information, which opened several new leads for the investigation. Detectives conducted thorough checks, but these efforts did not yield any significant results. Frustrated, Angel's family made the decision to hire a private detective. When Angel's father returned from a trip, he was hopeful that it would help locate his daughter, unlike the ineffective efforts of the police. However, despite the detectives' hard work, no new information emerged. 3 months passed, and there were still no updates on Angel's case. By this time, her friends had almost lost hope, but her mother remained determined. Angel's mother, Jackie, even altered the message on their answering machine, leaving a note for her daughter in the hopes that she would eventually call. She refused to believe that anything bad had happened to Angel. Meanwhile, the entire city was critical of the police for their lack of progress, which led to increased pressure on law enforcement to revisit existing leads and suspects. Eventually, detectives began to focus on a man who was engaged to Angel's best friend. He was very interested in finding out what happened to her and was vocal in his criticism of the investigation. His name was Candle. Even though he showed a strong interest in Angel, he did not give any information to the detectives or the media. It was believed that he had attempted to start a relationship with Angel and was rejected, which might have led to her kidnapping or murder. On the day she went missing, he was working at a shoe store in the shopping mall where she was last seen. He had a confirmed alibi for that time, but after work, he could have committed a crime, especially since he was nearby. He allowed investigators to search his car, but nothing suspicious was found. The investigation had reached another dead end. On December 15, 1992, 4.5 months after Angel's disappearance, a local resident was out hunting with his dog. While walking through the forest, the dog became uneasy and led its owner away. This took them to a drainage ditch, where the hunter noticed something wrapped in a sheet and tied with a rope. Upon closer inspection, he saw a human hand protruding from the package. The man quickly contacted the police. When law enforcement arrived, they discovered a body in an advanced state of decomposition. Identification was possible only through dental records, which confirmed that it was 17-year-old Angel Ormston, who had been reported missing. On December 16th, Angel's family was informed of her death. An autopsy showed she had suffered blunt force trauma to the head, which might not have been fatal. However, she had sustained 2 stab wounds to the chest, both delivered with significant force, impacting her heart. As a result, she bled out quickly and died. Investigating her death was complicated by decomposition, but fibers resembling those from a blue carpet were found at the scene. The police compiled a list of all homes associated with Angel, including those of neighbors, family, and friends, in search of a home that might have green carpeting. One key location of interest was the house belonging to Mark, who might have been the father of Angel's unborn child. At the time of the murder, the house was empty as it was for sale. Witnesses claimed they saw Mark enter the house with a girl who matched Angel's description. Although the house had been sold by then, the new owners allowed detectives to inspect it. Most rooms had been renovated, except for the basement. Upon entering the basement, the police found a blue carpet that matched the fibers collected from the scene. Additionally, a clothesline similar to the one used by the killer to move the body was discovered in the laundry room, matching the one found on Angel. The new owners reported that both the carpet and the clothesline had been left behind by the previous owners. These items were sent for forensic analysis, and tests confirmed that the microscopic fibers and the rope matched those used in the crime. Furthermore, a bloody fingerprint was discovered in the basement. 5 months after Angel disappeared, on December 31, 1992, 19-year-old Mark Sotka was arrested on suspicion of murder. During his arrest, he insisted that the police had no evidence against him and claimed he was not the person they were looking for. He immediately refused to cooperate with detectives, prompting forensic experts to conduct a detailed examination of his car. They discovered that although he had attempted to clean the interior, a few small drops of blood remained. During questioning, Mark eventually broke down due to the overwhelming evidence against him. He admitted to committing an act he described as stupid. When pressed for more details, he confessed to murdering Angel. Mark explains that he invited Angel to his house for intimate relations again, but things changed that night when she revealed that she was pregnant and that he was the father. This news triggered a violent outburst from him. He demanded that she get an abortion, but she refused. An argument ensued, during which Angel threatened to cause problems. In a fit of rage, Mark struck her several times in the face. Angel fell in the garage, and Mark, grabbing a knife, returned to the basement and stabbed her twice in the chest. Afterward, he calmly met with his friends at a pizzeria, chatting and laughing as if nothing had happened. Later that evening, he wrapped her body in a sheet, secured it with a clothesline, and transported it in the trunk of his car to a wooded area, where he left it in a ditch. Afterward, Mark returned home, covered up the evidence of the crime, and cleaned his car. After 5 months of investigation, he was arrested as the killer. During questioning, Mark confessed to first-degree murder and led authorities to the location where he disposed of the knife used in the crime. Despite thorough searches, the knife was never found. However, he had limited chances of proving his innocence. The motive for the attack stemmed from Angel's pregnancy, which disrupted his future plans. Mark had no intention of continuing his relationship with her and wanted to focus on someone else. In February 1993, to avoid the death penalty that was in place at the time, Mark officially admitted his guilt. Consequently, he was sentenced to life in prison but became eligible for parole after 30 years. Angel's family pointed out that Mark showed no remorse or compassion, which explained how he was able to deceive the polygraph test. Following his sentencing, he was taken to jail. After serving 20 years, Mark utilized an old Ohio law that allowed him to request a parole hearing after 2/3 of his minimum sentence. His family was informed, and Angel's relatives increased their efforts to prevent him from being released. Their efforts were successful, and he was denied parole in July 2023. After serving 30 years, Mark appeared before the parole board again, but this time, Angel's family opposed his release once again. As a result, he remains in prison. Angel's family expressed their relief to the media, calling it a significant victory for them. Her mother stated that their family would continue to fight to keep the killer incarcerated and would never forgive Mark, who has never expressed remorse or sought forgiveness for taking Angel's life and the life of her baby. It was a regular afternoon at Danvers's high school. Most students had already left, and the hallways were quiet. But inside a second-floor bathroom, something terrible was happening. A well-loved teacher had just finished her last class of the day. She had no idea that one of her students was watching her. Minutes later, security cameras caught something strange, him walking out with his hood up and hands covered in blood. He moved through the school as if nothing had happened, casually talking to classmates, grabbing his things, and disappearing into the night. No one knew the dark secret he had just left behind, not yet. Philip Chisholm was born on January 21, 1999, in Tennessee. From a young age, he showed a keen interest in sports, and by the time he entered high school, he had already made a name for himself as a talented soccer player. His skills on the field were undeniable. In 2012, his teammates credited him as the driving force behind their championship win in the league. To those around him, Philip seemed like a friendly yet reserved young man. No one suspected that beneath his quiet demeanor, he was battling deep personal struggles. Philip's home life was far from stable. His father, a former military officer, had succumbed to alcoholism and frequently subjected him to both physical and emotional abuse. Heated arguments with his wife, Diana Chisholm, were a regular occurrence. By the fall of 2013, the tension had reached a breaking point. They decided to separate. Philip was uprooted from the life he knew and moved with his mother to a small town in Massachusetts, while his father relocated to Florida. As part of their divorce agreement, his father was permitted only limited visitation with Philip. Practically overnight, his world had changed completely. Adjusting to a new environment proved difficult for Philip. Already introverted, he struggled to find his place at his new school. Socializing didn't come easily to him, but over time, he began to open up. He gradually integrated into school life, even trying out for the basketball team. Though he made friends, he was selective about whom he spent time with, limiting his conversations in class to only a few people he deemed trustworthy. He stayed away from alcohol and banned substance, never drawing much attention to himself. However, beneath the surface, trouble was brewing. Philip found academics particularly challenging. Rather than engaging with his lessons, he often retreated into his own world, sketching in his notebook and listening to music instead of paying attention in class. It was during this time that Caroline Ritzer, one of the most beloved teachers at the school, noticed this new student. Known for her ability to connect with students, Caroline had dreamed of becoming a teacher from a young age. Excelling in mathematics, she pursued it as her career, earning her degree in mathematics with a specialization in secondary education, and began teaching 8th grade math that same year. Her dedication to her students was unmistakable. She frequently stayed after school to offer extra help and used social media to engage with them. When Philip arrived at the school, Caroline quickly noticed his academic struggles. Understanding that he was going through a rough time, she saw potential in him and believed he just needed some guidance to get back on track. However, unlike most of his classmates, Philip showed no interest in her efforts. On the morning of October 22, 2013, Philip arrived at Danvers's high school carrying multiple bags. Inside them were gloves, a change of clothes, a mask, and a box cutter, items that had nothing to do with schoolwork. Later that day, he attended Caroline's class. When the lesson was over, she approached him, offering to stay after class to help him prepare for an upcoming test. Philip's reaction was anything but appreciative. Instead, he erupted into an angry outburst. Caroline attempted to calm him down, but he stormed off. At around 3 p.m., Caroline went to the bathroom, unaware that Philip was closely following her. By that time, most students had left the school. Philip quietly entered the bathroom wearing gloves and holding a box cutter. Suddenly, he attacked Caroline, covering her mouth with a cloth to silence her. He overpowered her and stabbed her at least 16 times. The assault was interrupted when another student entered the bathroom. She saw Philip but assumed he was just changing for soccer practice, not realizing the violence happening nearby. She left without raising an alarm, unknowingly encountering a murderer. Then, Philip left the bathroom with his hood up and one hand covered in blood. He headed toward the school parking lot with a sinister plan to find a dumpster to dispose of the body. On his way, he casually greeted several friends who had no idea about the horrific crime he had just committed. Soon after, he changed out of his clothes, putting on a white t-shirt and a red hoodie. With a recycling bin in hand, he returned to the bathroom. This time, he came out, made his way to the elevator and hiding his teacher's lifeless body. After leaving the school, Philip took the recycling bin to a secluded wooded area. There, he disguised Caroline's body with a tree branch and covered her remains with dry leaves. He also left a vague note that said, "I hate everyone." Acting normally, he returned to the school. Although his messy appearance should have raised concern, no one noticed anything unusual, allowing him to collect his belongings from his locker and leave without any interruptions. Philip thought he had gotten away with the perfect crime, but he was very wrong. Hours later, his mother started to worry when she realized he was missing. She went to the nearest police station to file a missing person report. At the same time, his soccer teammates noticed he wasn't at practice and began to search for him, becoming increasingly anxious. The police responded quickly and asked Philip's phone provider to track his last known location. The signal was traced to the area near Hollywood Hits Theater. Investigators went there and found that he had bought a movie ticket before disappearing. Shortly after that, his phone went offline at 9 p.m. The principal of Danvers High School emailed staff about Philip's disappearance. Shortly after, a math teacher called her with worrying news. Caroline Ritzer's parents also reported that she did not return home. This was particularly concerning because Philip had been in Caroline's last class that day, raising fears that they may have been together before they both disappeared. Caroline's parents were desperately trying to contact her, but their calls went unanswered. By around 11 p.m., they formally reported her missing. Police tracked Caroline's phone to the school area, noting the coincidence of two missing persons from the same school. This led them to investigate further. Their investigation took a troubling turn when they found Caroline's car still parked at the school, indicating something was wrong. While searching the building, they examined the second-floor bathroom and encountered a horrifying scene. Bloodstains covered the area, and Caroline's purse was left behind. A blood-spattered recycling bin was also found in the corner. Following this grim evidence, officers searched the woods behind the school and discovered blood-soaked clothing that belonged to Caroline. This evidence confirmed that a serious crime had occurred. Authorities quickly began questioning students and staff in hopes of finding witnesses. A student came forward to share an unsettling incident he had overheard between Philip and Caroline while he was organizing his locker. He noticed Philip was raising his voice at Caroline, who was trying to calm him down. The student thought Philip's anger might have been triggered by Caroline's question about his family, which unintentionally reminded him of his parents' divorce. Even though Caroline quickly moved on to a different topic, Philip continued to seem upset and began muttering to himself. The student felt that something was wrong but never thought Philip could become violent. A female student came forward with important information. She told investigators she saw the back of a person who appeared to be changing clothes. The person's rear end was exposed, with clothes piled on the floor in the bathroom that afternoon. Additionally, a mother who was picking up her child around 3:30 p.m. reported seeing Philip quickly leaving the school. This evidence suggested that something had occurred between Philip and Caroline. Detectives then reviewed the school's surveillance footage to understand the timeline of events leading up to their disappearances. The footage revealed alarming details. At 7:45 a.m., Philip arrived at school carrying several bags, which he stored in his locker. Then, at 2:54 p.m., Caroline was seen leaving a classroom and heading towards the second-floor bathroom. Just a minute later, Philip appeared in the hallway, watching her closely before briefly returning to the classroom. Moments after that, he came back into view with his hood up and followed her into the bathroom while putting on gloves. At 3:06 p.m., a female student was seen entering the bathroom and quickly exiting moments later. At 3:07 p.m., Philip left the bathroom with his hood up and walked to the parking lot. He returned 2 minutes later, now wearing a white t-shirt. After a few minutes, he was spotted again, this time in a red hoodie. At 3:16 p.m., he went back into the bathroom with a recycling bin. By 3:22 p.m., security footage showed him wearing a ski mask as he pushed the bin into the elevator. Shortly after, he was seen dragging it outside toward the student parking lot. Later that evening, Philip returned to the school, entered the bathroom again, and changed clothes. This time, he was barefoot, wearing a black hoodie. When investigators finished reviewing the footage, they were certain of one thing: Caroline had entered the bathroom but did not come out. In contrast, Philip had repeatedly entered and exited, changing his clothes each time and pushing a large bin on one occasion. Coupled with the blood evidence found in the bathroom, the conclusion was clear: Caroline had been murdered, and Philip was their main suspect. Law enforcement quickly began searching for Philip, who was still missing. They checked security footage from the school and nearby streets to see if they could find any signs of his movements. Simultaneously, they monitored Caroline Ritzer's bank account since Philip had stolen her wallet along with her credit cards, indicating he might have already used them. Their suspicions were confirmed when they found that Caroline's card had been used to buy a burger, fries, and a drink. A movie ticket was also purchased, and location data from Philip's phone showed he was at the theater shortly after the crime occurred. While police worked to find him, an unexpected turn of events happened. Around 2:30 a.m. on October 23, an officer in a nearby town saw a young man walking along the highway at the intersection of Route 1, North and Salem Road. It was Philip, aimlessly wandering without a clear direction. The officer recognized him from the missing person alert and stopped to ask questions. During a search, the officer found Caroline Ritzer's credit card and driver's license in Philip's possession. Additionally, his pants still had blood stains on them. He was promptly taken into custody and brought to the local police station. When officers searched Philip's backpack, they discovered Caroline's purse, her underwear, and a box cutter with dried blood on it. Alarmingly, there were also traces of semen and blood on Philip's own underwear. When interrogated about the blood, Philip coldly remarked, "It's from the girl," referring to Caroline, his teacher. He showed no remorse and proceeded to inform the police that her body was buried in the woods. At 3 a.m., a team of officers went to the wooded area behind Danvers High School. After searching for some time, they noticed a pile of leaves and debris. One officer spotted a thumb with pink nail polish sticking out from the leaves. When they removed the foliage, they were met with a horrifying scene. Caroline's lifeless body was lying on her back, her throat cut, and a tree branch had violated her remains. Her face and body showed signs of severe trauma. Nearby, officers found a pair of blood-soaked white gloves and a handwritten note that stated, "I hate everyone." Caroline's remains were quickly taken for forensic examination. The autopsy revealed she had suffered 16 stab wounds and had been abuse-assaulted twice. Philip was immediately charged with aggravated assault, armed robbery, and first-degree murder. He was held without bail. That morning, on October 23rd, police visited Philip's mother at her new apartment, which she had moved into after leaving Tennessee due to her divorce. She appeared very upset and acknowledged that the separation had been hard for both her and Philip. Later, through his attorney, she released a statement offering her condolences to Caroline's family. In contrast, Philip's uncle took a different view. He suggested that something must have triggered his nephew's actions, arguing that teenagers can be quick to anger, and noted that Philip was only 14 years old. He characterized Philip as a well-behaved child from a good family, seemingly minimizing the seriousness of the situation. Philip's former soccer coach shared similar feelings, saying he wanted to learn the full story before judging the teenager. Meanwhile, a student, Rania Redui, found it hard to comprehend the tragedy. She couldn't understand why anyone would hurt Caroline, who she described as kind and caring. Caroline's family was heartbroken and in deep mourning. On October 28, 2013, the community came together to pay their respects at her funeral at St. Augustine Church. The service was very emotional and attended by nearly 1,000 people, including 400 of Caroline's students from Danvers High School, many of whom wore pink, her favorite color. The entrance to the church was decorated with pink flowers, symbolizing the love and admiration she inspired in those who knew her. Caroline's cousin spoke passionately about the large turnout at Caroline's funeral, which highlighted the significant impact she had on her community. She noted that even though Caroline had a brief life, she made a lasting impression on education, inspiring many students with her dedication and love for teaching. She also emphasized Caroline's strong bond with her siblings, her commitment to being a supportive friend and mentor. With deep sorrow and respect, Caroline's cousin described Caroline as the ideal person any parent would wish for their child to become. The Reverend provided words of comfort, encouraging attendees to focus on the meaningful life Caroline led rather than the tragic way it ended. His message resonated with those grieving, reminding them to celebrate the positivity Caroline brought to the world. Months later, at a juvenile detention center in Boston, Philip committed another crime. On June 2, 2014, he entered a staff locker room bathroom and tried to strangle a 29-year-old medical staff member and attack her with a pencil. It took several employees to restrain him while he screamed threats, including, "I'm going to kill all of you." Although he didn't succeed in killing her, she was left seriously injured. A new case was opened against him, but he was still facing charges for the murder of Caroline Ritzer before going to trial for this attack. Philip's defense attorney admitted that he had killed the teacher but argued that he should not be held criminally responsible. She claimed he was experiencing a psychotic episode and suffering from severe mental illness at the time of the murder, even stating that he had heard voices beforehand. The prosecutor strongly disagreed, asserting that Philip did not have any mental illness and presented surveillance footage as evidence. The videos showed him carefully following Colleen into the bathroom, attacking her, and then coldly placing her body into a recycling bin before wheeling it outside. The prosecutor also highlighted that after the murder, Philip casually greeted friends, ate a meal, and watched a movie while carrying evidence of his crime in his backpack. After considering the prosecution's argument, the court rejected the defense's claim of criminal insanity, ruling that Philip was mentally competent to stand trial. Since the minimum age for criminal prosecution in the United States is 14, he could be tried as an adult. On December 15, 2015, a jury found Philip guilty of first-degree murder, aggravated assault, and armed robbery. As the judge read the verdict, Philip stood silently, his hands cuffed and his expression blank. Colleen's mother, heartbroken by his lack of remorse, declared that Philip was truly evil and beyond rehabilitation. Their family will never get a second chance with Colleen, and he shouldn't get one either, she said. Despite these emotional statements, Philip showed no reaction. He did not flinch or show any empathy or regret for the life he had taken or the family he had devastated. On February 26, 2016, despite the defense team arguing that Philip was mentally ill, he was convicted of killing Caroline Reed and sentenced to 40 to 60 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 40 years, a sentence that Colleen's family felt was not harsh enough. However, this was not his last sentencing. On April 26, 2024, a decade later, he faced trial again for attempting to murder a medical worker at the Boston Juvenile Facility. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense as his attorney declared that Philip wanted to take full responsibility and resolve the case quickly. Despite this, it was evident to everyone that he lacked genuine remorse. The medical worker he attacked described him as a monster and a remorseless killer. She recounted the terrifying incident, stating that he intended to kill her. During her testimony, she revealed that his face still haunted her as a constant reminder of the trauma he caused. She pleaded with the court to keep Philip in prison for life, so no one else would suffer at his hands. Ultimately, the judge sentenced Philip to an additional 17 to 20 years for the attack, to be served concurrently with his original sentence for Colleen's murder. To this day, Philip remains in prison, serving time for the crimes he committed against two women who only tried to help him, but were met with unimaginable violence instead. Colleen's family chose to celebrate her memory instead of focusing on their sorrow after her tragic death. 1 year following her murder, they created a scholarship in her honor. In a public statement, they remembered Colleen as a kind and caring young woman whose love for teaching defined her life. They take comfort in knowing that her legacy lives on. Many students who have received the scholarship are pursuing teaching careers, inspired by Colleen's dedication and passion for education. Although she is no longer, her influence remains strong in the classrooms and hearts of those who knew her. In October 2024, Chisholm's attorneys appealed to the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, arguing that brain scan evidence of mental illness had been wrongly excluded. On February 25, 2025, the SJC denied a new trial, upholding Chisholm's conviction and 40-year parole. Ritzer's family expressed relief, stating the ruling allowed them to grieve without appeal uncertainties. The brutal murder of Colleen Ritzer at Danvers High School left an indelible scar on her family, students, and community, shattering the illusion of safety in a place meant for learning. Yet, from this tragedy, Colleen's radiant legacy endures through the scholarship bearing her name, inspiring future educators to carry forward her passion and kindness. Philip Chisholm, whose cold indifference and violent acts stole a beloved teacher's life, remains behind bars, his 2025 appeal denial ensuring accountability for his crimes. As Danvers continues to heal, the memory of Colleen, her infectious smile, unwavering dedication, and boundless compassion, lives on, a beacon of light that no darkness can extinguish. Hello, true crime enthusiasts. Today, we will investigate another intriguing case, the case of Michael Wayne Jones. In 2019, the Jones family lived in a house next to Highway 27 in Summerfield, Florida, which is located in Marion County. The family included Father Michael, Mother Cassie, and their 4 children, Cameron, Preston, Mercalli, and Ayanna, who were between 1 and 10 years old. Cameron and Preston are Cassay's children from a previous relationship, while Mercalli and Ayanna are Michael's biological children. Michael was born on May 1, 1981 and grew up in Vermont. He had a difficult childhood marked by a poor upbringing and abuse from his father. Although his father was eventually imprisoned, his mother began a new relationship with a man who was just as abusive. When he grew up, Michael joined the United States Marine Corps as a medic. During this time, he met his first wife and became a family man, having 3 children with her. After several years of working, Michael's wife helped him get a job at a local veterinary clinic. It was there that he discovered his passion for managing a veterinary practice. During this time, he met Cassay, who had a very different background. Cassay was born on December 23, 1986, into a loving family with parents named Nikki and David, who provided her with a good upbringing. After graduating from high school, she moved to Florida in 2009. Cassay began her career in dog grooming, starting as a groomer and later becoming a veterinary technician. Friends described her as an amazing, kind, and caring person who would readily help others. Cassay and Michael first met at the veterinary clinic, which led to a significant change in their lives. Michael had a troubled past. In 2015, he was arrested for burglary after stealing money, computer equipment, and a firearm from the veterinary clinic where he worked alongside Cassay. Despite this, Cassay forgave him and supported him during this challenging period, even when he fled to New Mexico to escape arrest. Their professional relationship developed into a friendship and eventually blossomed into a romantic relationship. This prompted both of them to leave their previous partners and start a new family together. Michael became a stepfather to Cassay's 2 children, while leaving his own children with his ex-wife. Michael and Cassay welcomed their own children in December 2016 and August 2018. After marrying on Halloween in 2017, the family moved into a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom trailer in Summerfield, Florida. Although the space was limited for their family of 6, they were happy together and found the rent affordable. Cassay was a dedicated mother who prioritized her children's growth and happiness. To capture joyful moments, she created a YouTube channel to share memorable photos and videos of her children as they grew. Many of these videos showed Michael playing with his daughters, having fun with Cassay, and enjoying weekends together. He appeared calm and generally content with his life. In those moments, Cassay's laughter rang out, suggesting that their life seemed carefree and joyful. On July 10, 2019, the seemingly perfect life of Cassay began to unravel. Her friends noticed something was wrong when she stopped responding to their calls and went silent. When she eventually sent messages on social media, her friends became concerned because the messages didn't match her usual tone. The first person Cassay cut off contact with was her ex-husband, Richard Bowers, who is also the father of her sons, Preston and Cameron. On July 27, when Richard went to pick up his boys for a scheduled visit, he noticed Cassay wasn't home. When he asked Michael, who was at the house, about her, he was told she was out of town. Since Richard and Cassay had previously agreed that she wanted distance, he left with their children without any concerns. On August 1, Cassay's mother, Nikki, received a strange message from an unknown number, asking if she could care for Cassay's daughters, Mercalli and Ayanna, for a couple of weeks. Nikki agreed, but she never saw her daughter again. When Michael dropped off the children at Nikki's house, it felt unusual to her that he was the only one delivering them, especially since she hadn't heard from Cassay in over 3 weeks. At this time, Michael stayed home and cared for his first 2 children with his previous wife, Sarah. On August 11, the children returned home with Sarah, while Cameron and Preston remained with Michael. Weeks went by without anyone seeing or hearing from Cassay, and Michael took care of all the household chores. The situation became more concerning when it was noticed that Preston and Cameron were also missing. During this time, Michael listed twin mattresses for sale, and buyers from a nearby area expressed interest. On August 17, the buyers arrived at Michael's residence to pick up the mattresses, but the encounter was not normal. The mattresses smelled of death and Michael acted strangely, leading to a failed sale. On August 22, Richard, the biological father of Preston and Cameron, congratulated his son on his birthday, but received no response. A few days later, Cassay's other children, Mercalli and Ayana, also stopped communicating. Amid these unsettling incidents, the Michael family received an eviction notice, requiring them to vacate their rental property within 2 weeks. Soon after, Hurricane Dorian made landfall in Florida and surrounding areas. The storm was so strong that it was classified as a Category 5 hurricane, and is considered the strongest hurricane to have ever made landfall in the northwestern Bahamas in recorded history. A state of emergency was declared across Florida, prompting many to seek shelter or evacuate. Michael was one of those who left the area, heading north to stay with his ex-wife, Sarah, and their children. Although Michael stayed for 10 days, Sarah never saw him contact Cassay or the children. While she didn't approve of this, she was aware that Michael and Cassay were experiencing problems, so she didn't intervene. After the hurricane passed and the Michael family remained away from home, neighbors reported a terrible smell emanating from their house. The homeowner was notified and knew that Michael's family had supposedly moved out. However, when he looked out the window, he saw that the house was still full of furniture and personal belongings. It was scary, and the air around the house was filled with a strong stench, like something was dead and decomposing. Initially, Cassay's family and friends suspected that Michael was trying to go into hiding for legal reasons, causing the family to feel the need to go into hiding for protection. Therefore, they did not report her disappearance to the police. However, on September 14, 2014, her mother, Nikki, decided to contact the Marion County Sheriff's Office. It had been 66 days since anyone had heard from Cassay, 34 days since Cameron and Preston were last seen, and 17 days since Mercalli and Ayana were last heard from. Understandably, the police were very worried and promptly began an investigation. When the police arrived at the Michael family's home around midnight, local residents informed them that no one had seen the family for a long time. They also reported a foul odor coming from the house. The police quickly identified the smell as resembling that of a decomposing body, either human or animal. Additionally, the house appeared empty but very clean, as if it had been recently tidied up. Some floorboards looked brand new, but one board had noticeable red stains. This evidence prompted the authorities to launch an investigation in search of the Michael family, but their efforts were unsuccessful. The case took a dramatic turn when, on that same day, Brandley County, Georgia, police received a disturbing report from Summerfield, located 170 miles north of the Michael family's home. Michael had crashed the family car into a concrete sewer tunnel. Although he escaped uninjured, his car was damaged beyond repair. When the police arrived, they detected a strong, repulsive odor and asked Michael about it. He reluctantly confessed to the situation. Upon searching the car, the police discovered the decomposing body of his wife, Cassay. Additionally, Michael indicated where he had buried the bodies of his children. Michael was quickly arrested, and after he revealed to authorities the location of his children's burial in the woods near Highway 301 in Charlton County, a search was initiated. Investigators discovered a patch of freshly disturbed soil, and to their horror, they uncovered the bodies of Cameron, Preston, Mercalli, and Ayana. The news shocked the relatives and friends of the Cassay family. Richard lost 2 sons and his ex-wife due to her relationship with Michael, while Nikki had to endure the heartbreaking task of burying her daughter and 4 grandchildren. Michael's actions had a lasting impact on the mental health of many people. One of those affected was Michael's ex-wife, Sarah. Her children had stayed at Michael's house several times after he killed Casey and were under the watch of their father, the killer. Additionally, Michael sought refuge from a hurricane at Sarah's home for several days, meaning her children were living close to him during that time. Given the brutality of Michael's actions, it is alarming to consider that he might have harmed Sarah and their other children. Fortunately, he did not, which meant that Sarah and her children were incredibly lucky. After his arrest, Michael cooperated during interrogations. He calmly answered questions without trying to mislead the police and even expressed gratitude for being caught, admitting that he felt he couldn't do anything right. He explained that his actions stemmed from a heated argument with Casey after she accused him of having an affair. Michael described how Casey lost control when she confronted him with a baseball bat and struck him. In a fit of rage, he took the bat from her and hit her several times on the head, continuing until he believed she was dead. He then placed her body in a plastic bag and hid it in a closet, cleaning up any visible blood. During this time, their 4 children were asleep in the house. Following Casey's death, Michael began fabricating stories to cover up what he had done. For weeks, he used Casey's phone to send messages to friends and family, pretending she was still alive. On August 10, 31 days after killing Casey, he decided to murder her 2 sons. He strangled Cameron and then, the following night, used zip ties to strangle Preston. As time went on, the hot and humid weather caused a serious issue. The bodies began to decompose. To mask the smell, Michael tried using cat litter, but it was ineffective. On August 23, after the deaths of his wife and 2 stepchildren, he received an eviction notice, which increased his anxiety. Unable to keep the bodies in the house any longer, he felt confused. On August 25, he took his 2 daughters to the local police station. Sitting with them on a park bench across the street, he tried to figure out how to turn himself in. However, his determination turned to discouragement, and when he got home, he revealed his sadistic side. That night, he drowned both of his daughters, Mercalli and Ayanna, in the bathtub. 2 days later, during a storm, he went to Jacksonville to visit his ex-wife Sarah, without revealing that there were 5 bodies in the trunk of his car. The bodies remained there for 16 days until he finally buried his children. At the time of their deaths, Casey was 32 years old, Cameron was 9, Preston was 4, Mercalli was 2, and Ayanna was just 11 months old. Michael Wayne Jones's trial began on December 8, 2022, and it seems unlikely that he will be released anytime soon. Because the murder of Casey was not premeditated, Michael will face charges of second-degree murder for her death. However, he will be charged with first-degree murder for the deaths of his children. Since he has already confessed to these crimes, he is likely to receive a life sentence without the possibility of parole. It's important to note that Florida still has the death penalty, and the autopsy reports presented in court revealed some tragic details. Cameron had a broken lower jaw at the time of his death, and a plastic zipper was found around Preston's neck. The remains of Mercalli and Ayanna were discovered in a small plastic bag, which also contained a bottle with a pacifier labeled with Ayanna's name, and a small pair of baby sandals. Casey's body was wrapped in a rug and a black and white shower curtain, and her skull showed damage consistent with trauma from a heavy blunt object, indicating she was likely struck rather than injured accidentally. During the trial, the defense argued that Michael should not face severe consequences for several reasons. First, they emphasized his troubled relationship with Casey, portraying her as a domineering woman. Second, they noted that Michael had used various banned substances during the incidents. Lastly, they shared his mental health history, which was rooted in a difficult childhood marked by physical abuse from his father and stepfather. Michael displayed unusual behaviors, such as hitting his head against walls and floors, to quiet the voices in his head. It's important to mention that Casey was not entirely innocent in their relationship. Her sister described her as stubborn, aggressive, and at times cruel. Michael stated that he was frequently bullied by Casey, which added to his stress. He also claimed that the actions he took against the children were meant to keep them together with their mother, as he believed they should not be separated. The doctor and clinical psychologist found evidence that Michael came from a dysfunctional family, marked by mental and physical abuse. Despite this, the prosecution showed no mercy. However, all 5 murders occurred within 49 days, indicating that Michael had ample time to regain control of his emotions. Instead, he acted with cold calculation throughout the entire incident. Michael lied many times, such as using Casey's phone to fool many people, including Sarah, and even asking her to give a false alibi. During the trial, his ex-wife Sarah said she wanted them to hang him and end it all because she thought he didn't deserve to live another day. In Florida, Michael Wayne Jones has been convicted of first-degree murder, and if the jury agrees, he could face the death penalty. The final decision rests with Judge Circuit Anthony Taddy, who has not yet scheduled a sentencing date. However, given the circumstances, the judge is expected to render a fair judgment, whether that means sentencing Michael to death or not. His actions place him among criminals deserving of the harshest punishment. Killing your wife is horrific and unforgivable, but taking the lives of 4 innocent children is so appalling that it is almost unimaginable. During Michael's trial, Casey's sister shared the deep pain she feels over the loss of her younger sister and nephews. She eventually had to leave her job because seeing the children's clothes in the store brought her to tears. Following a nervous breakdown, she was unable to get out of bed for 6 months. The thought that her nephews and niece will never graduate, marry, or have children of their own is a constant source of torment for her, often feeling overwhelming. She believes Michael deserves the verdict the jury reached, and she hopes the judge will uphold it. On Friday, April 28, 2023, at a hearing at the Marion County Judicial Center in Ocala, Judge Anthony Taddy sentenced Michael Wayne Jones to death for the murders of 4 children. He was also credited with life in prison for the death of his wife, and was given credit for 1,322 days already served while awaiting the resolution of these cases. On a seemingly ordinary evening in Bolingbrook, Illinois, an unimaginable event occurred. A woman was discovered dead in her bathtub. Her hair was wet, and there was a severe gash at the back of her head. Initially, it appeared to be a tragic accident, perhaps a slip and fall, but as investigators delved deeper, inconsistencies began to emerge. The most shocking revelation: the individual who may hold the key to this mystery was someone dedicated to protecting the community. What really transpired that night, and how did this case evolve into a startling tale of deception, manipulation, and betrayal? Kathleen Savio was born on June 13, 1963, in Glendale Heights, Illinois. She was the youngest of 4 siblings, was raised by her parents, Henry Jerry Savio and Mary Savio. When Kathleen was just 2 years old, her parents divorced. Later, her mother remarried, and the family moved to a different city in Illinois. Despite financial difficulties during her childhood, Kathleen was determined to create a better future for herself. She focused on her education, eventually became an accountant. Friends and acquaintances described Kathleen as warm, friendly, and charismatic, with a unique talent for connecting with others. At 20 years old, she went on a life-changing blind date with Drew Peterson. He seemed charming and was initially a great match for her. Drew worked as a police officer in the Metropolitan Area Narcotics Squad in Illinois, a job that brought him respect and authority. Drew was born on January 5, 1954, in Bolingbrook, a suburb of Chicago, and was raised by his strict parents. Drew was an older brother to 2 siblings. In high school, He stood out as an athlete and was known for his competitive nature. During his teenage years, he started his first serious relationship with Carol Brown. After graduating, Drew enlisted in the U.S. Army in 1974 and married Carol that same year. He was discharged in 1976 and the following year joined the police force in his hometown. Within a year, he moved to an undercover role in the Metropolitan Area Narcotics Squad, where he gained recognition. By the age of 25, he was named Police Officer of the Year. However, his personal life was troubled. Despite having 2 children, his marriage to Carol ended in 1980 when she found out he was unfaithful. Carol received custody of their kids. Known for his arrogance, Drew often boasted to friends about how easily he attracted women. In 1981, he met Victoria "Vicky" Connolly, and they married in 1982. Their marriage lasted almost 10 years until Victoria decided to divorce him in 1992, citing ongoing domestic abuse as the main reason. This claim was later supported by her daughter, Lisa Ward, who lived with them from ages 8 to 18. She reported physical and psychological abuse from Drew. Until later, a troubling rumor from their marriage involved an incident after they purchased a bar together. One night, after leaving the bar, Victoria was in a car accident that required surgery. Some sources suggested that Drew might have tampered with her brakes, but no solid evidence came to light. During his marriage to Victoria, Drew began an affair with Kathleen Savio, who was unaware of his marriage. To Kathleen, Drew appeared to be the perfect partner. He showered her with gifts and affection, took her on trips, promised her a stable future. Moved by his attention, she quickly fell in love with him. When Drew eventually told her he was going through a divorce, he portrayed his wife as a banned substance addict and claimed he could no longer handle the situation. Their romance accelerated rapidly, leading to their engagement just 6 months after their first date. On May 3, 1992, shortly after Drew finalized his divorce, they got married. Over the next 2 years, Kathleen gave birth to their 2 children, but their relationship began to change. While she focused on raising their family, Drew sought excitement outside the home. What began as a loving relationship turned unhealthy. Drew's charming exterior vanished, revealing a controlling and abusive nature. At first, his mistreatment was verbal. He insulted Kathleen's appearance, calling her unattractive and making hurtful comments about her weight. As time passed, his behavior became increasingly harmful, trapping Kathleen in a marriage that was far from the fairy tale she had imagined. Drew's aggression intensified. One day, Kathleen, feeling frustrated and tired from his continual absence and lack of support with their children, confronted him. What began as a heated argument quickly escalated into violence. Drew grabbed her arm and pushed her into a table, causing her to sustain a head injury and multiple bruises. The injuries were serious enough for her to go to the emergency room. Although the hospital recorded the incident, Drew publicly denied any wrongdoing. In a televised interview, he claimed that, as a police officer, he needed to act differently than an ordinary citizen to protect his job. Kathleen decided to stay in her marriage despite the challenges. Meanwhile, Drew turned his attention to a new relationship with a much younger woman named Stacy and Callis, who was nearly 30 years his junior. He was even bringing Stacy to the home that he shared with Kathleen and their children. On at least one occasion, he spent the night with her in the basement while his family slept upstairs. Stacy, born on January 20, 1984, in Downers Grove, Illinois, graduated high school early and began working as a receptionist at a local hotel where she and Drew first met. For a time, Kathleen was unaware of the affair, but that changed in October 2001 when she received an anonymous letter that revealed Drew's involvement with 19-year-old Stacy. Although Kathleen's marriage had been struggling, this news devastated her. She confronted Drew, who denied the affair. Distraught, Kathleen called her sister, crying as she shared that not only had Drew cheated on her, but he had also physically assaulted her during an argument by throwing her against the refrigerator. By mid-2002, Drew had moved out of their home and into a new house just a few blocks away, which many viewed as a deliberate act to provoke Kathleen. The divorce was quite tense as Kathleen fought over custody, child support, and her share of Drew's pension. However, Drew was unwilling to compromise. Kathleen was a strong and devoted mother who refused to back down easily. Their disputes escalated, leading to the police being called to her home at least 18 times, each report documenting domestic arguments. One particularly alarming incident occurred on July 5, 2002. According to the police report, Drew broke glass in the house and then forced Kathleen to sit on the staircase for hours while he stood over her, brandishing a knife and threatening her life. Kathleen felt increasingly unsafe, especially since Drew was a police officer in the same department that handled her complaints. As a result, her reports were often dismissed as typical domestic issues, and no serious action was taken against him. Fearing for her safety, Kathleen sought legal protection. On November 14, 2002, she wrote a letter to the state's assistant prosecutor describing Drew's worsening violence, urgently requested an emergency protection order before it was too late. She warned that Drew knew how to exploit the system and that she feared for her children's safety as well as her own. Despite the urgency of her message, her requests were ignored. Kathleen felt helpless, alone with her children, and trapped in a perilous situation. Drew officially married Stacy on October 18, 2003, shortly after finalizing his divorce. At 49 years old, he married a 19-year-old. Soon after, Stacy gave birth to their first child. Initially, she seemed happy in her role as a stepmother, even though Drew's eldest child was not much younger than she was. Their life looked ideal. They traveled often, hosted extravagant parties, and portrayed themselves as a loving couple despite their significant age difference. However, the initial bliss did not last. Drew's controlling behavior re-emerged, and he became obsessive towards Stacy, monitoring her phone, tracking her movements, and making unfounded accusations. Then, on the night of Monday, March 1, 2004, a worried neighbor knocked on Kathleen's door several times without getting a response. Concerned, the neighbor decided to check inside and made a shocking discovery. Savio's nude body was found in the bathtub in the master bedroom of the Pheasant Chase Drive mansion. Naturally, Drew became the primary suspect, but he had a solid alibi. He was home with Stacy. He also stated that, as agreed, he had spent the previous weekend with his children and returned them to Kathleen on Sunday. Forensic investigators found no signs of forced entry or struggle in the home. Although Kathleen's autopsy showed bruises as well as a large, unexplained gash on her scalp, there were no defensive injuries. Authorities quickly classified her death as an accidental drowning without conducting a more thorough investigation. A significant detail was overlooked: the bathtub was completely dry when her body was discovered, raising further suspicions. The lead detective in the case was a close friend of Drew's, and his so-called interrogation of Drew resembled more of a casual chat between friends than an official inquiry. Stacy, supporting her husband, confirmed his alibi by claiming they had spent the entire weekend at home with their children. Kathleen's family was heartbroken by her unexpected death. Just days later, they held a touching memorial, honoring her as a devoted mother and a kind person. Shortly after this, Drew was awarded full custody of the two children he had with Kathleen. Stacy officially adopted them, creating the impression of a happy blended family. However, the facade of a perfect marriage soon crumbled. As time went on, Drew's controlling behavior became increasingly evident. By 2007, Stacy was fed up with his oppressive ways and seriously contemplated divorce. Then, on October 28 of that year, she disappeared without any explanation. Her sudden vanishing shocked her family, as Stacy had never shown any signs that she would willingly leave without informing anyone. Stacy's family began a desperate search for her and refused to give up until she was found. In contrast, Drew displayed little concern throughout the search process. During interviews, he made dismissive and sarcastic comments, implying that Stacy was merely enjoying attention and likely out dancing or with another man. Stacy's family suspected Drew might be involved, especially since she had recently told him she wanted a divorce, something he was unwilling to accept. As their suspicions grew, Drew tried to change the narrative by claiming that Stacy had changed a lot since her sister's death in 2006. He stated that she had been struggling emotionally and receiving treatment for depression. However, rather than clearing his name, these claims only heightened the investigators' concerns. Authorities began to question whether Kathleen's death was really accidental or if something more sinister was at play. Just weeks after Stacy went missing, both the Illinois State Police and the FBI reopened the investigation into Kathleen's death. In November 2007, Kathleen's body was exhumed for a second autopsy, which revealed findings that contradicted the original report. Forensic experts discovered clear signs of a struggle, indicating that she had fought for her life. As a result, Drew becomes the prime suspect in both the death of his third wife and the disappearance of his fourth wife. Instead of staying out of the spotlight, he actively sought media attention, appearing on talk shows and making arrogant, sarcastic comments as if he relished the notoriety. In January 2008, the case took a surprising turn when Drew's brother, Thomas Morphy, came forward with important information. He claimed that he helped Drew remove a large blue container from their house around the time Stacy disappeared. Several neighbors backed up his account, stating they had seen Drew with the container. Additionally, Thomas disclosed that he had assisted Drew in making a phone call from Stacy's phone, which made it look like she was at the airport shortly after her vehicle was found abandoned there. As the search for Stacy continued, the investigation into Kathleen's death advanced. On February 21, 2008, her death was officially reclassified from an accident to a homicide. About a year later, Drew was arrested as the main suspect. His legal team argued that they had a strong defense due to the absence of physical evidence, such as fingerprints, DNA, or eyewitness accounts linking him directly to the crime. As the trial progressed, accusations arose against the police department, with many claiming that Drew, having been a sergeant there, received preferential treatment and that the initial investigation was mishandled. This raised serious concerns about the integrity of law enforcement, suggesting issues of corruption and cover-ups. Exposing institutional bias alone did not establish Drew's guilt in Kathleen's murder. The prosecution needed a significant breakthrough. That turning point came when the lead prosecutor executed a strategic legal move that transformed the case. On May 31, 2012, Drew Peterson's trial began. The first witness was Kathleen's sister, Susan M. Savio. Her testimony deeply affected everyone in the courtroom as she recounted that Kathleen had confided in her about Drew threatening to kill her and make it look like an accident to avoid suspicion. Next, Neil Scory, a pastor and marriage counselor who had worked with Stacy, took the stand. He testified that Stacy had privately expressed her concerns that Drew was responsible for Kathleen's death. He recalled that Stacy once woke up in the middle of the night to find Drew missing around the time Kathleen was believed to have died. When Drew returned, he allegedly asked Stacy to lie to the police and provide him with an alibi. Further unsettling details emerged in court, including the fact that Drew had been present during Stacy's police interview, suggesting that he had pressured her to protect him. Additionally, the attorney who represented Stacy during her divorce revealed that Stacy had reached out to him just days before her disappearance, seeking legal advice about leaving Drew, and made it clear she believed he had killed Kathleen. Prosecutors claimed that Drew killed Kathleen out of fear that their divorce would leave him broke. For 3 weeks, jurors heard from 44 witnesses who shared disturbing accounts of Kathleen's case. One friend mentioned that Kathleen was so scared of Drew that she kept a knife under her bed for protection. After considering all the evidence, which was mostly circumstantial and based on witness statements, the jury, made up of 7 men and 5 women, deliberated for about 14 hours. Before the jury's decision was announced, Drew shouted that he was innocent. This caused Kathleen's brother to retaliate, accusing Drew of Kathleen's murder. Security had to step in to remove him from the courtroom. Ultimately, on September 6, 2012, Drew Peterson convicted of murdering Savio. On February 21, 2013, sentencing him to 38 years in prison with no chance of parole. Though he appeared calm during the trial, Drew's attitude changed in the following days. He directed his anger at the prosecutor who helped convict him. The prosecutor, however, remained unshaken and suggested that there might be further legal actions regarding Stacy's disappearance. Tensions escalated within Drew's legal team as his lead attorney filed an appeal, claiming that the original defense team had mishandled the trial. They argued that Drew was pressured into starting a media campaign before the trial, which ultimately harmed his defense. They also criticized the choice to call Stacy's divorce attorney as a witness, a decision that proved disastrous. Despite Drew's numerous attempts to overturn the verdict, the ruling remained intact. Kathleen achieved justice, but the fate of Stacy continued to be a perplexing mystery, with many believing that Drew Peterson held the key to the answers. While serving his sentence, Drew faced a new and shocking allegation. He was recorded in prison discussing a plan to arrange a murder for hire against the prosecutor who had led his case. He offered money to another inmate in exchange for carrying out the attack. In May 2016, he was found guilty of solicitation of murder and solicitation of murder for hire. He was subsequently sentenced to an additional 40 years in prison. Over time, Drew has maintained his innocence and persistently sought to appeal his conviction, arguing that the testimonies used during his trial violated his constitutional rights. In 2024, a significant legal development occurred when Drew's public defender requested a psychological evaluation to pursue a new trial. The judge instructed the county to conduct and finance the evaluation for Drew, who is now 70 years old. After a mandatory 30-day assessment period, the results showed that he was mentally competent to stand trial. At the same time, Drew's former attorney faced legal issues of his own, as he was charged with contempt of court. This situation arose when he allegedly breached a gag order by discussing the case in a nationally televised interview. During this interview, he claimed to have information that could clarify the circumstances surrounding Stacy's case. Although the lawyer denied the allegations, the judge reaffirmed the gag order, prohibiting him from publicly addressing the case. In the same year, Drew's eldest son, Stephen Paul Peterson, who became a police officer like his father, spoke out. He referred to Drew as his hero, highlighting that his father had always supported him and his brother. However, he confessed that dealing with the circumstances of Drew's conviction was extremely painful, making it hard for him to reconcile the loving father he had known for 36 years with the man accused of such terrible crimes. As for Drew's numerous appeals, none had been successful by that time. Stacy remained missing, and her family continued to hope that her body would eventually be found. They firmly believed that Drew was responsible for her disappearance and should be held accountable. This case generated significant public debate throughout the United States because of its many concerning elements. At its center was a police officer, an individual committed to protecting the public, who instead posed a threat to those around him. The chilling saga of Kathleen Savio's murder and Stacy Peterson's disappearance revealed a harrowing tale of abuse, manipulation, and betrayal orchestrated by Drew Peterson, a police officer entrusted with public safety. While Kathleen's justice was secured through a hard-fought conviction, Stacy's fate remains an unresolved mystery, leaving her family in anguished hope for answers. This case, marked by institutional failures and Peterson's brazen defiance, underscores the devastating consequences of unchecked power and the enduring pursuit of truth that continues to honor the memories of Kathleen and Stacy. In May 2023, police in Spain received a troubling call from a peaceful neighborhood in Torremolinos. Inside one of the apartments, they found the body of a young woman who had been stabbed multiple times. The suspect managed to escape but was caught a few hours later at a nearby cafe. However, this tragedy was just the starting point for a string of discoveries that connected to a case that had remained unsolved for 9 years. Behind the wall of a different apartment, investigators uncovered evidence that stunned even the most seasoned forensic professionals. In 2011, Sabora Gagani lived with her boyfriend Marco Gao Romeo in a small house in Torremolinos, Spain, close to the beaches. On the surface, their life appeared stable. Sabora worked as a waitress, and Marco was a chef. She frequently called her mother, Elisabetta, to reassure her that everything was fine. However, beneath this facade of stability were serious issues that became more apparent over time. When Elisabetta visited, she could immediately sense the tension in their home. Arguments between Sabora and Marco happened even in front of her. Elisabetta noticed that Sabora often tried to excuse Marco's jealousy and anger, attributing them to temporary difficulties. Yet, Elisabetta believed that their problems were much deeper than everyday challenges. Just 2 years ago, Sabora was a very different person. Sabora was born on September 14, 1991, In Albania, she was known for her vibrant and cheerful nature from an early age. After her parents divorced, her mother, Elisabetta, relocated with her children to Rome, Italy, where they began anew. Sabora quickly became well-liked by her peers, earning the nickname Tibi because of her lively and warm personality. Despite facing financial difficulties, she was determined to help her family. She began working as a waitress at a young age but never lost sight of her dreams. Her natural beauty, slim figure, and success in a local beauty contest opened doors to the modeling industry. However, her greatest aspiration was to become a teacher, as she truly loved working with children. Things started to change when Sabora turned 18. At a cafe, she met Marco, a 31-year-old man whose charm and confidence immediately attracted her. At that time, she knew very little about him. He was divorced, had a sister, and seemed eager to start anew. However, beneath this appealing exterior was a troubled past. Marco had a reputation for aggressive behavior and issues with substance abuse, which had led to multiple encounters with the police. Despite these red flags, Sabora was drawn to his charisma and chose to ignore the warnings. A year into their relationship, Marco proposed that Sabora move with him to Spain, claiming that there were better job opportunities there than in Italy. Elisabetta tried to convince her against it, expressing doubts about Marco's intentions, but Sabora was determined. She believed this move would be the start of a new chapter where she and Marco could create a happy life together. Initially, Spain seemed like a great opportunity for Sabora and Marco. Sabora quickly secured a job as a waitress, while Marco found work as a pizza chef. They rented a cozy home, and Sabora shared her hopeful plans with her mother. Unfortunately, their stability didn't last long. Marco started losing job after job, often blaming his employers for his failures. His frustration and jealousy intensified, leading to a rise in his aggressive behavior, which escalated from small disagreements to serious conflicts. When Elisabetta visited Spain to check on Sabora, she was taken aback by the situation. Sabora, once vibrant, confident, now appeared withdrawn and subdued. Marco showed his irritation openly in Elisabetta's presence. Their arguments became louder. Despite these significant issues, Sabora continued to defend Marco, reassuring her mother that everything would get better. Those who knew Sabora were confused about why she ignored the warning signs in her relationship. She may have looked to Marco for the support and stability she missed during her childhood. When her family moved from Albania to Italy, they faced many challenges. Elisabetta worked hard to create a better life for her children, but Sabora had to take on adult responsibilities at a young age. Her relationship with Marco seemed like a way to fill the emotional gap, but instead, it added more stress. Life in Spain was becoming increasingly difficult for Sabora as her youthful dreams faded away. In July 2014, Sabora Gagani vanished unexpectedly, leaving her family in despair. The last time she was heard from was through a text message to Marco, her ex-partner, on July 7th. After that, her phone was off, and her social media accounts were inactive, which was not typical for her. Earlier, Sabora had told her mother she had finally broken up with Marco, moved into a new apartment, and felt a sense of freedom. She compared it to a butterfly emerging from its cocoon. However, her abrupt silence worried everyone. The situation became even more puzzling when Marco showed up unexpectedly at Elisabetta's home in Italy. He tried to act like a concerned and remorseful man, claiming to care about what had happened. While having coffee, he told Elisabetta that he had no idea where Sabora might be. Marco explained that they had argued shortly before she vanished, and she had left without taking her belongings. However, he later changed his story, saying that a security guard at their apartment complex had seen Sabora leaving with 2 suitcases. These inconsistent statements raised more suspicions and increased worries. Elisabetta remembered that just a few days before, Sabora had decided to end her relationship with Marco for good after 3 years of attempts to fix things. Despite her efforts to distance herself from him, Marco remained persistently involved in her life. In early July, he unexpectedly called Elisabetta to ask if Sabora had returned to Italy. This question seemed strange to Elisabetta, especially considering Sabora's recent breakup and her repeated attempts to cut ties with Marco. Her mother recalled that, before, in 2013, Sabora had even gone back to her mother's home in Italy to leave everything behind, had realized that there was no future for her and Marco. However, Marco refused to let go. He traveled to Italy to see Sabora, begging her to give him another chance and promising to change, even proposing to her. Ultimately, exhausted by their turbulent relationship, Sabora succumbed to his promises. Unfortunately, the same cycle of jealousy, control, and aggressive behavior soon returned, disrupting her peace once again. At one point, Sabora told her mother that if she ever left Marco for good, she might have to disappear completely because she feared he wouldn't let her go. In the following months, Sabora made frequent trips to Italy, likely because her Spanish residency permit had expired. There were reports that she may have used a fake Italian ID for these travels. Elisabetta noticed her daughter appeared more and more scared, but Sabora rarely provided details about her situation. She only mentioned she was looking for a way to escape her troubles. Her family realized something was seriously wrong. Sabora would never cut off contact with them, especially with her mother and brothers. Now, all they could do was wait and hope that Sabora had chosen to go into hiding to escape Marco's grip. However, the conflicting stories and complete silence from her only raised more concerns. By 2015, the investigation into Sabora's disappearance had not made significant progress, despite the efforts of her family and law enforcement. Her mother, Elisabetta, was determined to file an official report with the authorities. She strongly believed that Marco, Sabora's ex-partner, was involved, as he was the last person known to have seen her before she disappeared. His behavior during the investigation only deepened suspicions. When questioned, Marco stuck to his story, claiming that Sabora left their home after an argument, after that they lost contact with each other. However, many of her personal items, including clothes and identification, remained in the apartment, which was strange. Despite his claims, Marco never reported her missing to the police. Instead, he claimed he tried to find her himself by printing and distributing flyers in their neighborhood. He also provided conflicting theories about where she might be, suggesting at one point that she had traveled to Argentina or had been seen with an unknown man with whom she allegedly had a confrontation. These statements were inconsistent and lacked credible evidence. Elisabetta, feeling distrustful of Marco, took matters into her own hands to find her daughter. She contacted the media and a specialized organization that helps raise awareness about missing persons cases. As a result, photos of Sabora and requests for information started appearing in both Italian and Spanish news outlets. However, these efforts did not lead to any new information. While Sabora's family continued to search for answers, Marco seemed to be living a fairly normal life. He changed his appearance by shaving his head and growing a beard, likely to avoid drawing attention. During this period, he entered into 2 new relationships, both of which ended due to the women complaining about his aggressive behavior. Nevertheless, Marco stayed in Spain, frequently going to the gym and joining a shooting club, which concerned those who knew his background. Sabora's family refused to lose hope. Elisabetta continually urged the police to step up their investigation. As a response, law enforcement began reviewing the case files to identify any overlooked details. They paid close attention to Marco's statements, which had seemed inconsistent from the start. Moreover, there were questions about why he hadn't contacted the police immediately after she went missing. As time went on, public interest in Sabora's case decreased. Despite her family's relentless search for answers, Marco, who was still in Spain, seemed to adapt to life after her disappearance. To his neighbors, he seemed friendly, focused on fitness and socializing. However, concerns about his character lingered due to his past relationship with Sabora and complaints from his new partners. While Sabora's family held on to hope for updates, the investigation remained stalled. Authorities broadened their search using international missing persons databases, but these efforts produced no leads. For those who knew Sabora well, the uncertainty about her fate was agonizing. By 2023, Marco seemed to have changed his life for the better. He was now living with a new partner, Paula, and they had a child together. Yet, beneath this seemingly fresh start, the same problems that troubled Marco for years persisted. His relationship with Paula was unstable. She confided in close friends and co-workers about experiencing physical abuse from him. During this time, Marco had difficulty maintaining a steady job, which made their financial situation worse. Over time, Paula became more aware of the challenges in Paula and Marco's relationship. She felt that Marco was not only aggressive at work but also unsupportive at home. Despite Paula's efforts to create the appearance of a normal life, her struggles were becoming apparent. For Paula, her primary goal was to save enough money to leave Marco and fight for her children's custody. Marco's situation was getting worse. He often told his master about his financial problems, stating he was working only for his family's sake. However, his aggressive behavior at work and inability to get along with co-workers made his master wonder if keeping him employed was worth the hassle. Meanwhile, Paula's friend noticed how serious Paula's situation was and encouraged her to stand up against the mistreatment. Despite this, Paula was too afraid to take any confrontational action. She confided in her friend that Marco had hit her 4 times and kicked her, but she minimized the seriousness of these incidents. This indicated that Paula needed immediate help. On Tuesday, May 16, 2023, Paula enjoyed her day off, excitedly sharing her plans for a relaxing evening with her coworkers. However, the next day, May 17, took a tragic turn. Around 11:30 a.m., loud shouting came from the apartment that Paula shared with Marco. Although arguments were common between them, this time it sounded much more severe. Paula's voice was clearly heard, calling for help. Victor, Marco's landlord and boss, could hear a loud disturbance coming from her apartment. Worried, he hurried over with a co-worker from the restaurant. When they arrived at the door, they began knocking and shouting to find out what was going on inside. They heard soft sobbing, which then stopped abruptly. Shortly after, Marco opened the door, appearing calm, and told them everything was fine, saying Paula had just gone to bed. However, the absence of Paula's voice made Victor uneasy. This situation was particularly alarming given recent events. Just days earlier, Victor had fired Marco after a series of troubling incidents, including the mysterious disappearance of a kitchen knife. Victor had begun to distrust Marco and wanted to prevent any further issues. Now, Marco was involved in another troubling situation. While Victor went to get a spare key to the apartment, the co-worker called the police. Marco, seeming to recognize that the situation was getting serious, remained calm but acted unexpectedly. He suddenly left the apartment and walked out of the building without explanation. When the police arrived, they found the apartment locked. Victor soon returned with a spare key and entered the apartment to investigate further. Inside one of the rooms, they discovered Paula's body on the floor, stabbed 14 times. Her clothes were drenched in blood, and it was clear she had died several hours prior. The police secured the crime scene and called in forensic experts to gather evidence. They also began searching for Marco, who had fled the scene. Meanwhile, Paula's body was sent for an autopsy to determine the exact cause of death. Just a few hours later, Marco was found sitting calmly at a cafe table. He did not resist arrest and appeared unfazed by the situation. On May 20, 2023, 3 days after Paula's tragic death, Marco appeared in court. He was charged with a crime involving aggravating circumstances related to gender-based violence. The court ordered a psychiatric evaluation and substance testing. Marco was denied bail and remained in custody during the hearing. He chose to stay silent, only speaking to respond to his lawyer's questions. There was no mention of Sabora Gagani. However, just a few days after his arrest, Sabora's case gained attention again. Marco then made a surprising confession while being interrogated at the police station. He stated that during an argument in 2014, he had killed Sabora and hidden her body in the apartment they shared. Despite his confession, law enforcement decided to focus on the investigation into Paula's death first and postponed verifying Marco's claims about Sabora. Elisabetta, Sabora's mother, was devastated by the news of Marco's arrest and his admission about her daughter. For 9 years, she had advocated for a reopening of the investigation, convinced of Marco's involvement in Sabora's disappearance. Marco's confession led to the official reopening of Sabora's case, prompting investigators to validate his statements, starting with a look into the apartment where he and Sabora had lived in 2014. By early June 2023, Spanish investigators concentrating on Sabora's case meticulously examined the building layout where she and Marco had lived. A notable detail emerged: there was a large space that should have been part of the bedroom according to the building plans, but it was missing in reality. After receiving permission, investigators entered the apartment on June 6 and broke through the wall. They found a large wooden box filled with lime. Inside the box, police discovered important evidence: a plastic bag containing a knife with dried blood and personal items believed to belong to Sabora. Among these items was a wilted bouquet of flowers on top. The box also contained several plastic bags, one of which had a camping sleeping bag that held human remains. These remains were sent for forensic analysis to identify the person and determine the cause of death. To confirm the identity, Spanish authorities requested DNA samples from Sabora's family in Italy. On June 10, police visited the home of Sabora Gagani's mother, Elisabetta, to collect a saliva sample. The DNA results confirmed that the recovered remains belonged to Sabora. In the week that followed, new information about Marco's actions came to light. During interrogations in Spain, he claimed to have tried to dispose of the body using acid, but this claim could not be verified. Investigators observed that Marco often changed his statements. For Elisabetta, the confirmation of her daughter's remains was heartbreaking. After 9 years of uncertainty, she felt her hope had been taken away, although she had never stopped seeking answers about what happened to her daughter. Over the years, her life had changed significantly. Sabora's father passed away from illness without ever discovering the truth about his daughter. Although her efforts ultimately led to answers, they also brought a bittersweet feeling of closure. Forensic experts are continuing to analyze the evidence collected from the location where Sabora's remains were discovered. A knife found in a plastic bag has been sent for testing to check for biological traces that might connect it to Marco. At the same time, Spanish investigators are working with their Italian colleagues to gather additional materials related to Sabora's disappearance. Although there is evidence against him and he initially confessed to being involved in Sabora's death, including disclosing where her remains were located, he later took back his confession. Marco's lawyer claims that his statements were made under pressure and should not be accepted as evidence in court. Nevertheless, investigators argue that the items found in a hidden box, including Sabora's personal belongings, give them solid grounds for pursuing further charges. The investigation into Paula's death is still active, with Marco as the main suspect. In January 2024, several months after the discovery of Sabora's remains, her family was finally able to hold a burial after all forensic examinations were completed. Her remains were returned to her loved ones in Italy, where friends and family gathered to say their final goodbyes. As a tribute, they released balloons into the sky, each carrying heartfelt messages of hope and farewell. Meanwhile, significant attention was on the ongoing legal case against Marco, who was facing charges related to Paula's death. During a hearing on January 30, 2024, Marco presented a handwritten 17-page letter admitting his responsibility for Paula's death, but he included many conditions. He stated that the conflict stemmed from ongoing arguments about shared debts and her infidelity. Marco claimed that he used excessive force in self-defense during the altercation, which led to the tragedy. Marco admitted certain things about Paula, but he was unwilling to give detailed information about Sabora's case. He confirmed that he wrapped her body in plastic, placed it in a wooden box, covered it with flowers, added lime, and sealed it in a wall. However, he insisted that he was not responsible for her death, claiming that his actions were driven by fear of the situation. During the trial, Marco changed his story about how Sabora died, providing a completely different account. He claimed that the Albanian mafia, which he said he was involved with due to debts, was the one who killed her. According to Marco, he had borrowed €25,000 to start a brothel, but the money was stolen. When he couldn't repay the debt, he said 4 men came to his house, and during an argument, one of them killed Sabora. Marco stated that he was then threatened with his own life and forced to dispose of her body to avoid more trouble. This version of events raised serious concerns among investigators because Marco had changed his statements multiple times during the investigation. It became clear that he had lied to mislead authorities. There was no evidence to support his claims of mafia involvement. An autopsy revealed that Sabora had died from multiple stab wounds, indicating a violent crime. Sabora's family finally learned the truth about her fake years after she was reported missing. Her mother, Elisabetta, shared that she had spent the last 9 years hoping for answers. By May 2024, the trial for Paula's case was in progress, and the court moved forward with a jury trial to address charges of domestic violence and homicide. Meanwhile, Sabora's case had been reopened but had not yet gone to trial, as investigators continued to examine Marco's claims. Further court proceedings were expected. The experiences of Sabora Gagani and Paula illustrate the harmful effects of relationships characterized by manipulation and abuse. Sabora had aspirations for a promising future, while Paula was working to regain control of her life. Both women were negatively impacted by the same individual. Their stories remind us of the crucial need to identify the early signs of abusive behavior and take action to prevent further harm. Heloísa Maria de Alencastro Souza was born in 2008 in Cuiabá, central West Brazil. She lived peacefully with her mother, Suelen de Alencastro, and her grandmother. The family led a simple life, blending in with their community. Heloísa attended Adventist College in Centro Politico Administration, where she was a dedicated student. She was quiet in class, always completing her assignments and staying out of trouble. Heloísa didn't have many close friendships, but she did have one trusted friend with whom she shared personal thoughts. This friend later suggested that Heloísa displayed some traits of level 1 autism, although she was never officially diagnosed. Signs included her reserved nature, avoidance of eye contact, and anxiety in social situations. Despite this, Heloísa was warm and friendly with those she trusted. She had a deep passion for animals, aspired to become a veterinarian. She took her dreams seriously, researching veterinary programs from a young age. Her grandmother noted that she was responsible, helpful around the house, capable of cooking, cleaning, and caring for the family pet without needing constant supervision. She was an ordinary teenager focused on her future and goals, living a life that was steady, unassuming. Benedito Anunciaco de Santana was born in 1984 into a modest family and was the younger of 2 brothers. His older brother later became involved in a legal case related to a violent crime against his former partner. Their father was a laborer, while their mother stayed at home. The family lived in a suburb of Cuiabá. Neighbors noted that both boys were quiet from an early age and did not have a close relationship with their parents. As a teenager, Benedito began attending a local Catholic church and eventually started helping out during services. After finishing school, Benedito obtained an entry-level job at a local government agency. Through personal connections and a reputation for hard work, he gradually advanced in his career. At the time of these events, Benedito was the head of the Transportation Division at the Secretariat of Science, Technology, and Innovation in Mato Grosso. He earned a stable income, had access to a work vehicle, and was regarded as someone with a respectable social standing. In his daily life, Benedito often attended local events, expressed concerns about neighborhood problems, and suggested new initiatives. He stayed active in his church. On social media, he consistently shared religious posts, inspirational quotes, photos from events, and images of places of worship. Many of his pictures featured his son, Gustavo Benedito Jr. Lara de Santana, or were taken at churches and community celebrations. His online presence reflected the image of a stable, respectable man with strong faith. Not much is known about Benedito's personal life before he met Suelen. At the start of their relationship, he was not married and was not living with his son's mother. There are no official records of his past relationships. His behavior suggests that he deliberately kept details of his personal history private, only sharing information that supported his public persona. Suelen was employed at a government agency in Cuiabá, where she met Benedito. At first, he appeared confident, friendly. In the workplace, he was known as a dependable and dedicated employee. He was always polite, calm, and eager to assist his colleagues. This positive impression significantly influenced Sue Ellen's choice to let him become part of her life. Their relationship reportedly started about 4 months before the incidents in question. The investigators found evidence that Benedito had full access to her home, often used her keys. This indicates that their relationship might have been more serious, long-lasting than it seemed at first. Benedito quickly became a regular part of Sue Ellen's home life. He started visiting unexpectedly, moved around the house confidently, and appeared to integrate himself into their daily routines. To outsiders, it seemed he genuinely cared and was making an effort to be involved with the family. He was calm, rarely raised his voice, and had a knack for making others feel comfortable. Benedito was older, had a stable job, projected an image of responsibility, maturity. Sue Ellen did not seem to notice anything alarming. She saw him as a source of support. Inside the house, the atmosphere was tense. Heloisa's grandmother, who lived with them, felt uneasy about Benedito's frequent visits. It wasn't that she disliked him, rather, she found his overly polite and gentle demeanor insincere. Heloisa herself felt uncomfortable during their first interactions. Although she didn't confront him or create conflict, she made a point to avoid engaging with him. She confided in a close friend, expressing that Benedito made her uneasy, even though she couldn't pinpoint exactly why. She was troubled by his gaze, his speech, and particularly the way he posed in photos. What concerned her the most were his social media posts, where he used hand gestures that reminded her of criminal symbols. She told her friend frankly that he appeared to have a shady background. Despite this, she chose not to share her concerns with her mother, possibly fearing she would be misunderstood. Heloisa's friend noted that Sue Ellen seemed either unaware of Heloisa's change in behavior or didn't consider it important. No one in the household questioned Benedito's past, his acquaintances, or his previous relationships. His behavior never raised any alarms. A seemingly decent person had gained Sue Ellen's trust without arousing suspicion. On Tuesday, April 22, 2025, at around 3 p.m., it was a typical weekday in Cuiabá. Sue Ellen and her mother were at work, leaving Heloisa home alone. She wasn't expecting any visitors, everything seemed calm. At that time, Benedito arrived at Sue Ellen's house in a government-issued Fiat Toro, which he used for his job at the Secretariat of Science and Technology. He had 3 teenagers with him, his son Gustavo and 2 others, aged 16 and 17. They had been instructed earlier and stayed hidden in the vehicle to avoid attracting attention from neighbors or security cameras. Their plan was to wait until there were no adults in the house. Benedito parked the car in the garage and entered the house alone. Surveillance footage showed that he was inside for about 15 minutes. He then returned to the car and left. The cameras did not capture anything unusual. He seemed calm. Neighbors did not report hearing any noise or seeing any signs of trouble. However, during that brief time, Benedito had let the 3 teenagers into the house. One of the confessions revealed that the group waited until Benedito left the property before executing their plan. Heloisa was inside the house alone when she saw strangers and became terrified. In her panic, she tried to escape to another room, but one of the intruders caught her. She was in shock, unable to scream or fight back. They tied her legs. Tragically, her life was taken in a room using a USB cable. At the time of the crime, Benedito was not in the house. He had reportedly left to take a work-related call. However, testimonies indicated he was aware of what was happening. Heloisa lost consciousness on the floor due to difficulty breathing. One of the attackers checked for her pulse and breathing but reported she was unresponsive. They then used ropes and bed sheets to move her body, wrapping it up, dragging it into another room to hide it temporarily. They ransacked the house to make it look like a burglary. Their next plan was to attack on Sue Ellen. By 6 p.m., Sue Ellen came home with a female relative who was holding an infant. Security cameras captured their arrival. Everything seemed normal outside, but inside, the assailants were preparing to strike. Although the lights were off, the air conditioning was running, raising Sue Ellen's suspicions. She called out for Heloisa but received no answer. As they entered the house, the 3 teenagers attacked Sue Ellen, overpowering her, hitting her, tying her up and dragging her further inside. The woman with the infant was not harmed. She was instructed to sit quietly against the wall with the baby, not to interfere, while the attackers showed no aggression towards them. Sue Ellen was initially confused about the situation. She had been tied up, physically harmed, and locked away in one of the rooms. She thought a robbery was happening, suspected that her daughter might be tied up somewhere else in the house. The intruders did not provide any explanations, nor did they show their faces or give their names. However, at one point, Sue Ellen recognized one of the voices as belonging to Gustavo, Benedito's son. This realization made her understand that the attack was not random. While keeping Sue Ellen isolated, the intruders began to steal valuables from the house. They quickly loaded a TV, electronics, important documents, and the sheet covering Heloisa's body into Hyundai HB20. They used Sue Ellen's own car to transport the stolen items. Once they finished loading everything, the group left the house. Neither neighbors nor passers-by noticed anything out of the ordinary. Sue Ellen remained inside, still tied up and injured, unaware of the full extent of what had occurred. She believed that Heloisa had been taken away from her. No one had informed her of the truth. The crime was disguised as a robbery with an abduction. The scene was chaotic. Cabinets were forced open, the lights were off, and there was a mess everywhere. It resembled a typical break-in, but it had actually been meticulously planned. The perpetrators wanted it to look like a regular home invasion. Sue Ellen had no idea that the worst had already happened. Soon after the others left, Benedito returned to the house. He didn't go in immediately. Instead, he waited outside until he was certain everything was finished. Once inside, he found Sue Ellen bound and visibly shaken. She told him that a group of young men had broken in, attacked her, stolen items, and taken Heloisa with them. Benedito's reaction was exaggerated. He pretended to be surprised, anxious. He was merely acting as if it were the first time he heard the news. Benedito was the one who suggested taking Sue Ellen to the nearest urgent care clinic. He posted on social media with a photo of Heloisa, making an emotional appeal for assistance, stating that she was missing and he needed everyone's support. His actions were carefully planned to portray him as a distressed, worried stepfather seeking help. When they arrived at the hospital, Sue Ellen was brought in a wheelchair. Surveillance footage showed Benedito assisting her into the building, talking to medical staff, and staying close to her. He appeared to want to be seen, made no effort to avoid the cameras. Authorities quickly launched an investigation after receiving a report of an assault and possible abduction. While Sue Ellen was receiving medical treatment, police took her statement, began collecting evidence. The first action was to track her vehicle, a Hyundai HB20 registered to Sue Ellen. Surveillance systems monitored the car's route, capturing it traveling along Dubai Avenue and then toward the area between Ribeiro du Lipa and the highway leading to Guarujá. In that area, investigators found a white bundle made of bed sheets and evidence indicating the vehicle had stopped there. They also discovered an old concrete well in Ribeiro du Lipa, which is where the body had been hidden. The fire department was called to safely recover the remains. Forensic experts found that the lower legs had been bound, and there were marks around the neck suggesting restricted breathing. There were no clear signs of a physical struggle. A broken leg occurred, possibly from falling down the well. At this point, investigators started to focus on individuals close to the family. While reviewing surveillance footage, they noted Benedito's unusual behavior and his attempts to portray himself as a victim. Meanwhile, investigators began gathering information about Benedito's son, Gustavo. The first arrest happened quickly. A 17-year-old involved in the crime was found hiding in an apartment in a housing complex. He surrendered immediately, did not resist. During questioning, he provided a detailed account of the events, naming all those involved, including Gustavo, the second teenager, and Benedito, who he identified as the mastermind behind the plan. The teen explained how the group operated, where they hid, how tasks were divided, who created the plan, and how the crime was executed. With this information, investigators located Gustavo at his grandmother's house. Law enforcement arrested him without incident. Gustavo confirmed the details provided by the first teen, did not deny his involvement, and shared that his father had instructed him to gather people, outline the plan, actively involve him in the attack. His statement clarified that Benedito had initiated the entire scheme, that Gustavo participated in hopes of gaining his father's approval. The next arrest was of a 16-year-old who was found hiding in a messy lot in Tropicalville. He admitted to being involved in the crime but shared limited details. However, by the time he was arrested, the investigation already had a clear understanding of the situation. The recovered items matched the locations identified by various suspects, but the most important evidence came from their consistent testimonies. These statements outlined how the crime was planned, who was responsible for each part, their actions at different stages, and the order in which they occurred. Technical evidence had already linked Benedito to the central role in the crime, now it was reinforced by the direct confessions. Once all the individuals involved in the case were in custody, Benedito was brought in for questioning. Initially, he denied any involvement, claiming he was unaware of the crime, he equally shocked by what had occurred. His statements contradicted the confessions of the others. The investigators decided to set up a confrontation. The first meeting was between Benedito and a 17-year-old. When asked to speak, the teenager did not hesitate. He clearly stated that Benedito had given the instructions, taken them to the house, and left them to execute the plan. He identified Benedito as the mastermind, explained how he received specific directives. In his defense, Benedito labeled the teenager a liar, emotionally unstable. Benedito asserted that he would never allow harm to come to Eloisa and claimed he hardly knew the teenagers his son associated with. Things changed when Gustavo entered the room. He clearly stated that he had followed his father's commands. Investigators observed that this was when Benedito's story started to shift. He became vague, deflected blame, and avoided giving specifics. Later, Benedito provided a different account, saying that Sue Ellen had allegedly informed him that her daughter was exploring non-traditional personal identities and had supposedly asked him to remove any influence. He interpreted this as a prompt to take action. However, there was no evidence to support his claim. Eloisa's close friend told investigators that Eloisa had never shown romantic interest in anyone, shied away from personal topics, and had not pursued any relationships. Her family confirmed that she lived in a private world, showing no interest in intimacy or social connections. Benedito's attempt to blame Sue Ellen was viewed as a clear strategy to evade responsibility. Investigators found no evidence that Sue Ellen had any involvement in planning the crime. Benedito crafted a narrative to present himself as a victim, claiming he had misunderstood someone's words and hadn't given clear instructions. During psychological evaluations, investigators observed manipulative tendencies in his behavior. Benedito consistently influenced others while staying in the background, creating no direct links to his actions and controlling events from afar. Testimony from the teenagers made it clear that he was the key figure behind the actions, carefully avoiding direct involvement. He assigned roles, provided instructions, timed events, and maintained an external alibi. Additionally, it was revealed that in 2020, Benedito's biological brother was convicted of a violent crime against his ex-spouse. This attack occurred in broad daylight and resulted in fatal injuries. At the time, Benedito's brother was already subject to restraining orders but disregarded them. Although this was legally separate from Benedito's case, investigators noted a troubling history of aggressive behavior within the De Santana family. As the investigation progressed, Benedito's true nature came to light, revealing him as a manipulative and calculating individual. He not only got teenagers involved in a serious crime but also exploited his own son, believing Gustavo would stay silent. His behavior was cold and calculated, showing no remorse. Attempts to present an alternative story quickly fell apart. The testimonies of his accomplices, along with solid evidence, painted a clear picture against him. When confronted with undeniable facts during questioning, Benedito began to confess. He told investigators that just before the crime, he saw messages between Sue Ellen and her ex-partner, which he interpreted as a betrayal. He felt used and rejected, leading to a breaking point for him. He admitted that Eloisa annoyed him and recognized that she didn't accept him, always regarding him with suspicion. However, He denied harboring any personal hatred towards her, insisting he only wanted to restore balance in his relationship with her mother. This confession confirmed that the crime was premeditated rather than impulsive. It was not motivated by greed or fear of being caught. Instead, it stemmed from a personal desire for revenge, aiming to emotionally break someone and establish control, all while maintaining the facade of a respectable individual. The interrogation revealed that the physical aggression towards Sue Ellen was also planned, intended to incapacitate her, undermine her will, and create a false narrative of a robbery. Benedetto aimed to manipulate Sue Ellen's condition and emotional shock to present himself as a concerned bystander and divert suspicion from himself. After the initial investigation, prosecutors confirmed that the case would be treated as a premeditated crime with aggravating factors. The presence of minors, the use of deceit, pre-planning, a government vehicle, and the false staging of an abduction all bolstered the prosecution's argument. Benedetto Annunziato de Santana was identified as the main suspect. He was arrested, suspended from his public position, and subsequently fired. By the time the investigation began, all suspects were in custody. The teenagers were moved to appropriate facilities, while Gustavo, who had just turned 18, was waiting for legal proceedings to take place in adult criminal court. The public's response was immediate and strong. The crime against the young girl, involving her stepfather, caused widespread outrage. Local media extensively covered the case. Central to the public's concern was the issue of trust. How could someone who seemed decent be capable of planning such a crime against his partner's daughter? Sue Ellen learned about her daughter's death while being treated by medical staff. After the assault, she had been taken to the nearest urgent care facility for help. At first, Sue Ellen thought her daughter had been kidnapped and held on to hope that she would be found alive. However, as the investigation continued and the body was discovered in a well, the police revealed the tragic truth. Sue Ellen reacted with intense grief and despair. Witnesses reported that Sue Ellen went into a state of hysteria, requiring sedation. Hospital staff recalled her screaming that she didn't feel alive, that everything was over, and that she somehow felt responsible. Later, while giving her testimony, Sue Ellen admitted she blamed herself for what happened. She realized she failed to recognize the true character of the man she had welcomed into her life. Benedetto had seemed trustworthy, kind, and attentive. Only Eloisa had been wary of him from the start, but Sue Ellen dismissed her concerns as typical teenage defiance. Sue Ellen survived, but she was deeply affected by her experience, resulting in a loss that could never be reversed. The case is being investigated as murder, armed robbery, and child abuse. Eloisa's memory lived on, touching the lives of people beyond just her family. The school she attended released an official statement offering condolences and remembering her aspiration to become a veterinarian. Her relatives urged the public to be more careful about whom they invite into their homes, particularly regarding the safety of their loved ones. Although this family's story ended in tragedy, it served as a strong reminder that danger can often appear in the guise of kindness, and that the justice system's role extends beyond punishment to include prevention. Surveillance technology, law enforcement, and the analysis of digital evidence were essential in solving the case. However, the most crucial factor was our focus on the small details, those initial signs that indicated something was wrong. The story of a young Italian college student named Giulia Cecchettin profoundly affected the entire country in the fall of 2023 due to its tragic and senseless nature. Giulia was known for her kindness and trust in others. She showed compassion to a young man who had strong feelings for her, fearing that if she rejected him, he might harm himself. Unfortunately, rather than hurting himself, he directed his pain toward others with devastating results. The full scope of the tragedy was later revealed through Giulia's personal journals, which documented her growing discomfort and emotional struggle. In the aftermath, the individual responsible for the tragedy tried to avoid responsibility by claiming that his actions were driven by overwhelming emotions and temporary confusion. However, the investigation consistently uncovered evidence suggesting that his actions were premeditated. Giulia Cecchettin was born on May 5, 2001, in Padua, Italy. She was the middle child in her family, with an older sister named Elena and a younger brother named Davide. Despite their different personalities, Elena being energetic and rebellious, while Julia was quiet and obedient. The sisters were very close from an early age. Their family was middle class. Gino, Julia's father, was an engineer at a local company. Her mother, Monica, worked in city administration. They lived in a spacious house and had several vehicles. Both parents were dedicated to their children. They working hard to provide everything they needed to become kind, responsible individuals. From a young age, Julia was known for her kindness, empathy. She naturally connected with people, always striving to be helpful and considerate. At times, she was excessively gentle, often avoiding conflict even if it meant sacrificing her own interests. Julia had a wide circle of friends, effortlessly fit in with any group. In school, she consistently achieved top grades, had a strong interest in literature and foreign languages. However, her true passion lay in art classes, where her teachers recognized her talent and encouraged her to pursue it further. As a teenager, Julia attended an art academy while still in high school, seriously contemplating a career in the arts. However, as graduation neared, her parents urged her to opt for a more practical, stable career. Taking her father's advice, she enrolled at the University of Padua, one of Italy's leading public universities, chose to study biomedical engineering. Always one to avoid conflict, she agreed without protest and committed herself to her studies, even though she lacked genuine interest in the field. She did not envision a long-term career in biomedical engineering. While at university, Julia met a classmate named Filippo Turetta, who was also in Padua. Filippo came from a humble background and was the only child of his parents, who cared for him deeply. Julia and Filippo were in the same department. A mutual attraction quickly grew between them. Their relationship started with long conversations, emotional support, and facing challenges together. When Filippo began to struggle with his studies, Julia helped him catch up and pass his exams. Soon after, he asked her out on their first date. They officially started dating in January 2022, which was Julia's first serious relationship. Coming from a protected upbringing, she quickly became very infatuated with him. For the first 6 months, they were nearly inseparable, enjoying each other's company and appearing genuinely happy, which led their family and friends to believe in the strength of their bond. Just 2 months into their relationship, Filippo invited Julia to dinner at his home, where he referred to her as his future wife while introducing her to his parents. A few weeks later, Julia reciprocated by bringing Filippo to meet her family. Their friends were convinced that Julia and Filippo would get engaged by the time they graduated. Life took a devastating turn for Julia's family when her mother, Monica, was diagnosed with a late-stage illness, and the outlook was grim. Monica's health deteriorated quickly, and despite numerous consultations, doctors indicated there was little hope. The next 6 months felt like a waking nightmare for the Sacchetin family. During this challenging period, Filippo tried his best to provide support. He stayed close to Julia and also spent time with Monica. Julia truly valued his presence. She was thankful for his kindness and unwavering support. Nevertheless, even though Monica agreed to participate in experimental treatments, she sadly passed away in October 2022 at just 51 years old. Her death created a huge void in the family. For her husband, Gino, the grief was nearly unbearable. He felt emotionally overwhelmed. It was only through the love and support of his children that he found the strength to carry on. Although Filippo continued to be supportive, changes began occurring in Julia's feelings toward him. Even though they were still together, she started to feel distant and uncertain about their future. She began to consider ending the relationship but was unsure how to address it without causing conflict or upsetting him. She confided in only her 2 closest friends, people she had known for years and trusted. They were shocked. On the surface, Julia and Filippo appeared to be the perfect couple, with a happy, harmonious relationship. However, beneath that facade, things were unraveling. Julia didn't provide specific details but communicated that the relationship had reached a breaking point and ending it seemed inevitable. She didn't want to hurt Filippo, but she could no longer continue living a lie. The true reason behind her decision would only be revealed much later, following her passing. At that time, Giulia was focused on preparing for her final thesis presentation. However, she realized that she didn't want to pursue a career in biomedical engineering. It simply didn't resonate with her. Without mentioning it to many people, she quietly applied to a prestigious international art school that specializes in comic illustration. When she finally confided in her father, she emphasized that she would complete her university degree as she had promised. She intended to graduate and obtain her qualifications as her parents expected, but after that, she wanted to pursue a second degree in something she was passionate about, becoming an illustrator. Gino listened intently and supported her decision. After the loss of his wife, he had a new outlook on life, recognized its brevity and fragility. He encouraged his daughter to follow her own path, make her own choices, and dedicate herself to what truly made her happy. Giulia's conversation with Filippo turned out to be much harder than she had expected. It took place in August 2023, after they had been together for over a year and a half. Giulia found it difficult to express herself, but Filippo seemed to handle the news maturely. He suggested they remain friends and stay in touch, recognizing the connection they had. Since they attended the same university and studied in the same department, they saw each other frequently. However, less than a week after their breakup, Filippo attempted to rekindle their relationship. He invited Giulia to one of their favorite restaurants, a place that once held special memories for them. He asked her to give their relationship another chance, reminding her of their good times together. Giulia, however, remained resolute. She did not want to repeat old mistakes. The evening ended quietly, but an unspoken tension lingered, only becoming stronger with time. Filippo's behavior took a troubling turn. He began contacting Giulia every day, initially expressing his love and pleading for them to get back together. However, this quickly shifted to manipulation and threats. He warned that he might harm himself if they didn't reconcile. Knowing Giulia's compassionate nature, he exploited her empathy, pushing her emotional buttons. Concerned for his well-being due to his unstable nature, Giulia reluctantly agreed to stay in touch. They briefly resumed seeing each other, driven more by worry than love. Giulia hoped this was only temporary and that their connection would eventually fade. However, Filippo's behavior became increasingly alarming. He flooded her with messages, some of which were distressing. In one, he ominously stated that they would either be together forever or their lives would both end. Although this was a clear threat, Giulia chose not to report it and only confided in her closest friend. This intense situation persisted for nearly 2 months. In late October 2023, Giulia realized she could no longer live in fear. She was set to present her thesis in medical engineering on November 16th, and her classes at the International School of Comics were starting in December. Her schedule was now fully packed, leaving no time for emotional drama or unhealthy attachments. Although still anxious about how Filippo would react, she decided to invite him to a quiet cafe they used to visit. She carefully chose her words to avoid any conflict, explaining that they could remain friends but nothing more. Despite her attempt to be respectful, Filippo was deeply disturbed by her decision. He took the news hard, began to call and message her frequently, but Giulia, busy with her thesis, limited him responses to brief notes. It was around this time that Filippo started secretly following her. He soon noticed she was spending time with someone new guy. Their friendship appeared warm and affectionate, suggesting they might become a couple. Filippo struggled to accept this, and a darker plan began to take shape in his mind. On Saturday, November 11th, 2023, Giulia dedicated most of her day to her graduation project. At around 5 p.m., she sent the final version to her academic advisor. Earlier that day, about an hour before, her ex-boyfriend Filippo called her, asking if she would join him to shop for shoes for their upcoming graduation ceremony. It was unusual for him to reach out, as he hadn't contacted her at all for about a week. No texts, calls, or visits. Giulia thought that he had finally accepted their breakup and moved on. Wanting to remain on good terms, she agreed to help him with the shopping. They planned for him to pick her up at 6 p.m. Giulia informed her father that she would be home before midnight and hugged him tightly as she left, unaware that it would be the last time he would see her alive. Filippo arrived at the Sachetan house right on time. Julia got into the passenger seat, and they drove to the shopping center in Margra. Witnesses later reported seeing them calmly browsing the stores together. They bought a pair of shoes. Choretta and Julia also had dinner together at a McDonald's inside the mall at around 9:02 p.m., with Julia paying for both meals with her credit card. They then left the building at around 10:30 p.m. At 10:43 p.m., Julia sent her final message via WhatsApp to her sister Elena, who was in Vienna at the time for college. However, at 10:45 p.m., her messages suddenly stopped, and she never replied again. Shortly after, her phone was turned off. When Julia didn't come home by midnight, her family started to worry. At first, they tried to remain calm, thinking she might have just lost track of time. However, by 1 a.m., they began to sense that something was very wrong. Julia never stayed out overnight without letting someone know. Her phone was off, and they couldn't reach Filippo. Her father and older sister went to file a missing person report while her younger brother stayed home in case Julia returned. They still held on to a small hope that her phone had died or that she had been delayed, but they believed she would have found a way to let them know she was okay. Police were doubtful about the situation. They pointed out that as an adult, Julia had the right to choose not to return home or inform anyone of her location. Only a few hours had passed since she was last seen, and according to standard procedure, search efforts for missing adults usually do not start until 24 hours after they go missing. What no one knew at that moment was that about 4 hours before her family reported her missing, an alarming incident had already occurred. This detail was initially overlooked in relation to Julia's disappearance, but it would soon become evident that it was significant. At around 11:15 p.m. on the night Julia disappeared, local police received a call from a man. While on his balcony smoking a cigarette, he witnessed something alarming. His apartment overlooked a small parking lot across the street, where he heard someone screaming for help. When he looked more closely, he saw a young woman, clearly terrified, escape from a parked car. Moments later, a man exited the same car, chased her down, and forced her back inside while appearing to hit her. He then pushed her into the back seat and quickly drove off, speeding into the night. The witness tried to remember the license plate number, but couldn't see it clearly in the dark and from a distance. He did remember that the car was a black compact vehicle, possibly a Fiat Punto. He quickly called the local authorities to report what he had witnessed, but since he didn't have many identifying details, they had little to work with. Initially, the authorities dismissed his call because they didn't see it as an immediate threat and chose not to respond. However, the man couldn't shake the feeling that what he had seen was more serious than they realized. Believing he had witnessed a crime, he decided to go to the police station in person. At the station, he met a man named Gino, who was there to report his daughter, Julia, missing. To their surprise, they discovered they lived only a few houses apart. The man's building was near the end of the street, right across from a small parking lot where the unsettling scene had occurred. The black compact car he described looked a lot like the one driven by Filippo. That same evening, Filippo had picked up his former girlfriend in his black Fiat Punto before they went to the shopping center. Investigators reached out to Filippo's parents, who were understandably anxious. They had been calling friends in hopes of hearing from their son, but unfortunately, no one could provide any helpful information to the police. Officers were quickly sent to the parking lot, which was now thought to be the location of a violent incident. To their disappointment, there were no security cameras in the area. However, security video footage from a factory in the nearby town of Faso shows Filippo brutally beating Julia. When she tried to escape, Filippo hit her again from behind, then stuffed her bleeding body into the trunk of his black Fiat Punto. When arriving at the scene of the attack, what they uncovered was alarming. On the ground was a large knife, its blade broken near the handle. Nearby were several dark reddish stains. Although the blood wasn't excessive, it indicated that someone had been injured. Forensic experts confirmed that the knife bore Filippo's fingerprints, the blood matched Julia's DNA. The broken blade and a deep gouge in the pavement. Investigators feared the worst but still hoped that Julia might be alive and urgently in need of help. Both students' phones had been turned off shortly after the incident, data indicated that their last known location was that parking lot where the suspected assault and abduction occurred. Law enforcement opened a criminal case against Filippo, charging him with assault and unlawful detention based on the evidence collected. His parents were shocked and firmly believed that their son would never hurt Giulia, claiming he loved her deeply. Detectives started tracking Filippo's movements by examining footage from roadside surveillance cameras. Later that night, a black Fiat Punto was spotted heading towards a lake in the Porton province. The next day, the vehicle was seen in multiple areas. On November 12, a young man who matched Filippo's description bought something at a gas station near the Austrian border. He used a €20 bill that had what looked like dried blood on it. The cashier didn't pay much attention to this detail at the time, but later surveillance footage confirmed that the buyer was indeed Filippo. A disturbing piece of evidence surfaced shortly after. Security video footage from a factory in the nearby town of Fosso shows Filippo brutally beating Giulia. After the assault, he stood over her lifeless body for several minutes before putting her in the trunk of a car. Investigators found pools of blood and clear signs of a struggle at the scene, leaving no doubt that Giulia had likely been killed. However, her remains were still missing, and the suspect's whereabouts were unknown. Filippo was officially declared wanted throughout Europe. Giulia's body was discovered near Lake Barsis in Piancavallo on November 18, 2023 by the Special Dogs Unit of the Civil Protection. The body was found inside a large nylon bag in a cave at 50 meters altitude, within a wooded area that is generally closed during the autumn-winter period for security reasons. The Italian Forensic Services performed an autopsy on December 1, 2023, and reported that Giulia's body had over 20 stab wounds. She had blunt force trauma to her head, and there were clear signs of her wrists being restrained. Additionally, adhesive residue on her face indicated that her mouth had been taped shut. The circumstances of this case suggested a personal motive and an unusual amount of anger. Filippo was found on November 19 in an emergency lane of a motorway near Leipzig after his car had run out of petrol. Authorities arrested him and sent him back to Italy, where the case had caused a national uproar. During his initial questioning, Filippo confessed in detail about the events, but he stated that he was emotionally disoriented at the time and couldn't recall some parts of what happened. He recounted that they had spent a pleasant day shopping at the mall. On their way back, they stopped in a parking lot near Giulia's house. Filippo gave her a stuffed animal as a gift and asked if they could start their relationship over. Giulia reportedly raised her voice, rejected the gift, and got out of the car, which he claimed triggered a sudden outburst of anger. He grabbed a knife and chased after Giulia, injuring her shoulder in the process. She fell to the ground, and when he tried to strike her again, he missed, causing his knife to break when it hit the pavement. Filippo claimed he forced her back into the car, tied her wrists with rope, and covered her mouth with tape before driving around without a specific destination. Eventually, they ended up in an industrial area. According to him, Giulia managed to open the door and escape. He then took out a second knife and pursued her, continuing to attack until she stopped moving. When asked how many times he hit her, Filippo estimated maybe 5 or 7. However, the forensic team found over 20 wounds, and his story of an unplanned outburst was contradicted by the fact that he had arrived at the meeting with 2 knives, rope, tape, and plastic bags, indicating he was prepared. Filippo claimed he planned to take his own life afterward in order to be with Giulia. He even revealed shallow cuts on his wrists, although he confessed he didn't go through with it. He found it easier to end another's life than to end his own. Despite strong evidence implicating him, his family's legal team maintained that he was mentally confused and had memory loss. Their entire defense strategy focused on this idea, aiming for a lighter sentence or a transfer to a psychiatric facility instead of serving time in prison. Giulia's father, in his grief, took a remarkable action. He gave investigators pages from her personal diary and later made some of them public. His goal was to reveal the truth and draw attention to what his daughter had experienced. The diary entries clearly explained why Giulia had decided to end her relationship with Filippo and what was happening out of public view. Although she had loved him, Filippo had become controlling, emotionally manipulative. He monitored her whereabouts, kept track of her phone and social media, forbade her from seeing friends, and expected her to obey his demands at all times. A significant conflict occurred just before the tragedy involving Filippo's insistence on attending a small family birthday party for Giulia's sister, Elena. This event took place shortly after their mother had passed away, and Giulia's family was not in the mood to celebrate. Despite this, Filippo was angry, feeling that he was part of the family and had the right to attend all family gatherings. This disagreement made Giulia reconsider their relationship, and she recognized that she needed to end things for good. However, Filippo began to use emotional manipulation, threatening to harm himself if she left him. Giulia, being compassionate and empathetic, felt guilty about this. Unfortunately, her kindness would eventually lead to devastating consequences. On September 23, 2024, the summary trial of Filippo Turetta began at the Venice court. He is charged with intentional homicide, aggravated by malice, cruelty, brutality, stalking, and improper disposal of a corpse. By the start of the trial, new evidence indicated that the crime had been premeditated. Investigators discovered that Filippo had begun planning the attack about a week prior, conducting extensive online research for isolated locations in the suburbs that he could use to carry out the act and conceal the aftermath. His browsing history confirmed this. During a search of his car, officers found a printed map of the area. Initially, its relevance was unclear, but it later became evident that Filippo had chosen to use a physical map instead of GPS to avoid leaving a digital footprint. He meticulously planned every detail, but he seemed uncertain about what to do afterward. There were weak indications that he might have considered self-harm, but this was not convincing. By the time of his trial, it was clear that Filippo had acted with intent. He abandoned the emotional disorientation defense and made no claims of psychological instability, admitting that his actions were intentional. As expected, Turetta was questioned at the hearing on October 25, where he presented a 40-page memorial in which he detailed his actions. This prompted the court to cancel the hearing scheduled for October 28, as sufficient questioning had already taken place. At the hearing on November 25, 2024, the prosecutor requested a life sentence for Filippo Turetta. He was sentenced to life imprisonment on December 3, 2024, concluding the trial at the first instance. Aggravating circumstances of premeditated murder, kidnapping, and concealment of the body were acknowledged, while charges of stalking and cruelty were dismissed. In addition, Filippo must pay €760,000 in compensation to the Sacchetin family. In his final statement to the court, Filippo stated he would not appeal the verdict, acknowledging it as fair and expressing no intention to contest the outcome.